Liarta Elheim was addressed, ordering her to raise her head, and the girl immediately obeyed. Approaching her, the man said that unlike her twin brother was able to awaken the power of water, while she had never managed to do so even before she turned 20. Fortunately for the man, they found a solution to this problem in ancient writings. The girl's death was supposed to enhance her brother's strength. The girl didn't say anything to this, and she knew that she was the only one in the family who hadn't awakened. A disgrace to the duchy and a creature that no one would have loved if she hadn't tried. The man gave the order to begin the ritual, and the priests instantly obeyed, casting a spell around the girl. While the priests were performing the ritual, the girl kept thinking that if she hadn't tried, she would have never been able to receive love from her family. She would have liked to have another chance. Suddenly, the crystal began to shine brightly. Everyone around began to marvel at this. The priests also noticed that everything was starting to get out of control and could barely contain the energy that began to flow into the girl from the already broken crystal. Liarte promised herself that if she had a second chance, she would definitely run away from her family. It was as if someone was calling her loudly in her sleep, begging her to open her eyes. She did so when she saw someone she didn't know. The girl opened her eyes in an instant and began to look around the room, which she was sure had been burned on the day of the ritual. It seemed to her that it had all been a dream. She didn't understand why she was still alive, but she wasn't allowed to think about it because her brother came into the room asking how she was doing. The sister immediately asked why he had come, to which the brother replied that he wanted to visit her. Then, taking her hand, he menacingly said that because of her, all the plans had been ruined. He told his sister that she was making him mad, and the girl was very surprised, but looking at his expression and his words, she remembered something. 3 years ago, she protected Leonretius from hired assassins, but was injured herself, so she fainted, and all of her brother's affairs had to be postponed. Now everything was happening as it had been that day, and she began to assume that she had returned to the past. The sister released her hand from her brother, and also answered him with the same coin, adding that next time she would not act so rashly. The boy was greatly impressed by these words. Suddenly, someone burst into the room and told Leon to follow him immediately. The guy asked what was the matter. Ain said that his father had summoned all the awakened, because the spirit stone had suddenly begun to glow and the young lord should take a look. Without asking anything else, the boy said that they should tell him everything else on the way and left the room. The elder threw a quick and condescending glance in the girl's direction. Left alone, the girl remembered that during the execution, the spirit stone had cracked and it seemed to her that some energy had entered her body. She thought that she could have awakened the power of water. The girl decided to check it out and, concentrating, began to imagine something, stretching her arms out in front of her. In a moment, a water ball began to form inside. Opening her eyes, Liart was pleasantly surprised that she had succeeded. She had truly been able to awaken the power. She didn't know yet whether it was a curse or a blessing, but she was sure of one thing. Now she would definitely leave the Duchy of Elheim. The carriage rode calmly through the forest. The young gentleman was asked how his eyes felt. The boy replied that he still couldn't see anything. The knight relayed the words of Elheim, who was certain that Birsha was behind the recent commotion with the hired assassins, and asked the lord's opinion on whether the curse would now be lifted from him. The boy replied that he couldn't have known that. Only someone awakened by the power of water could lift the curse, but if they refused, they would be able to gather compromising information on them. The knight looked out the window and informed the gentleman that the Imperial family had probably sent another gift. The young man immediately said that he must get rid of it. The two strangers were looking at the carriage trail. No longer heeding them, the knight asked what the lord would do if he found someone who could lift the curse from him. Raising a lump of dark energy, the boy replied that he would give everything to the savior. The dark energy of the master immediately targeted the enemies and began to strangle them. The guy also said that he would help the savior get rid of the enemies and establish justice. Removing the blindfold, he said that this was Birch's motto. The man met Mikael at his residence somewhat tensely, asking the reason for his arrival. The young man replied that he had a certain request, but sensing the tension in his interlocutor's mind, he replied that if he was uncomfortable with his presence, he could be kicked out. However, he immediately showed the envelope and said that he had official permission to visit. The man did not say anything to this. The document in the envelope meant that the visitor would not harm the family, and a visitor with an official document signed by the temple could not be expelled. The man felt that he was being deceived, but still gave his word to Mikhail to explain the purpose of his visit. The guy explained that he had permanently lost his sight, and even the saints could not lift this curse, so he needed a water-awakened one. Smiling slyly, the man replied that it wouldn't be that easy, because anyone who agreed to lift such a curse could pay with their own life. So he said it was better to give people a choice than to force them, at least a month to find a volunteer for this. Mikhail thought for a moment, but still agreed to the terms of waiting. Walking down the corridor, the knight asked if Elheim agreed to know the curse. The lord said no, which was expected, as he had always doubted the existence of an awakened being who could lift the curse. Liarte watched them from the window. It seemed like the girl heard every word they said. It was already late evening outside, but the knight didn't see anyone on the horizon, so he turned to Birch and asked if he would stay here any longer. The knight said that the duke had just gathered all the awakened ones, so it was worth checking. The lord thought for a moment. The boy saw this as a great opportunity, so he gave the knight the task of going to the duchy to find out everything about Elheim. Valto immediately obeyed and left the room. Left alone, Mikhail pondered the fact that he would most likely never regain his sight. And that was the problem. Although he could still use his power, his blindness made it difficult to control. In the worst case, controlling his power could become even more difficult. Suddenly he heard someone's footsteps and thought that the murderers had broken in again. He immediately followed the sound of the footsteps and said that he did not like uninvited guests. The girl stopped abruptly. He was about to strike the stranger with his strength, but the girl's voice said that she was not a murderer, and even less so the awakened one sent by the duke. The young man immediately sensed a strange aroma. It was not the usual unpleasant smell of the waters of Elheim, but a pure and enchanting aroma. Although he could not see, he could feel everything perfectly. He asked her how she found him, but without answering his question, Liarte immediately said that she could help lift the curse from him. Approaching him, she asked him what he would be willing to do in return for his curse and his sight. The girl waited for an answer. The boy was silent for a while. He squeezed her hand tighter and then said that if she really succeeded, he was ready to do anything for her that she wouldn't want. To begin with, she wanted to take a general look at the condition of his eyes, and the guy didn't resist. She carefully tried to remove the bandage, but it was tied too tightly. Mikhail explained that he had tied it so tightly on purpose so that he wouldn't have to call the knights every time. In fact, he could have removed the cloth from his eyes himself, but he didn't want to say it. He liked feeling the gentle and light touches of the stranger. Finally, the girl managed to remove the blindfold and began to look carefully into his eyes. Liarte finally noticed that there were some seals swirling around Birch's pupils. This must have been preventing the boy from seeing. When she realized what it was, she stepped back a little and said that it was dark magic. This kind of magic was different from ordinary magic, and the 7 seals circling around it didn't make the task any easier. The young man asked how the girl knew about this, since the Duke despised dark magic. She could not admit that she had previously read forbidden books about it in order to earn the love of her family at that time. Nevertheless, she decided not to focus on this right now, because if nothing was done, the boy would face eternal blindness, so she wanted to remove at least 1 seal and started right away. Mikhail began to feel a great power seeping into him. He could not have imagined that there was someone in Elheim with such powerful power. Finally, the girl finished, and the young man noticed that he felt a little better. The lady immediately informed him that it would be difficult for his body to cope with all the seals at once, so she would remove 1 a day. Then she put on her cloak and hurried away. Michael also said goodbye to her, although he did not know her name, and the lady was in no hurry to reveal it. Left alone, he looked at the fabric and thought that for some reason the girl was attracting him. In her past life, half of Elheim was plunged into war, and the main reason for this was Mikhail Birke. Finding himself in a hopeless situation, the Duke admitted that because of the curse, the Lord was ridiculed and ignored, so he decided to take revenge on them. The Duke then said that her death would awaken the spirit stone that was to provide Leon with power and enable them to confront the Birche family. However, she already knew that the true owner of the stone was she, not her brother. The girl thought that if the Duke had known about this from the very beginning, he would never have done this to her. According to Imperial law, a minor awakened aristocrat belonged to the family until she came of age, but then she had the right to choose where she lived. If she kept it a secret, she would become free. The girl stood up and, approaching her brother, asked the reason for his visit. The boy replied that he was worried about her, but this did not impress her sister at all. His sister's indifference surprised him greatly. He didn't understand when she had become so cold towards him. Leon tried to assure him that her well-being was important to him. However, the girl understood that in reality her brother simply could not use his power without her, and her words shocked him, but he tried to calm down. After leaving his sister's room, he kept wondering why Liart had changed so much since the moment she had protected him from the assassins. His thoughts were interrupted by Ain, who came to report that the stone's radiance had increased again. When they arrived at the dungeon where the stone was kept, the boy asked how long it had been shining like that. He was told that it had been shining since the morning. Leon tried to interact with the stone, but it did not react to him at all. This started to anger the boy somewhat, and he began to doubt whether the spirit stone was really reacting to him. Meanwhile, night had already fallen, and Liarte, once again covering herself with a cloak, went to Mikael to continue his treatment. Finally, she came up to him and greeted him by his full name. He asked if she was tired of being called that, allowing her to simply call him by his first name. She didn't argue and readily agreed, which somewhat surprised the young man, because he felt that the girl wasn't the least bit put off by this. Liarte asked how Mikael was feeling today. The boy replied that he was better, because yesterday he couldn't even look at the light. At this, the lady began to remove another seal. Suddenly, she noticed that the boy's hands were shaking a little, so she placed her hand on top of them to calm him down, and asked him to believe her. Although Birch could not see her, her words deeply affected him. He felt how delicate her hands were, how small she was in herself, and yet she tried to calm him down. The young man couldn't believe it himself, but smiling, he replied that he believed her, mentally realizing that she was the first person who had interested him so much. The girl did not become distracted, and concentrating slowly removed the seal. When she finished, she asked if he was in pain. Smiling, the guy replied that everything was fine. Still, he couldn't help but notice that his interest in her was only growing, but not only because of her strength. Sitting down next to her, the girl breathed a sigh of relief, for she had previously worried that he might be in pain. Mikael was surprised that she had treated him so well, even though his reputation did not allow for this. He liked this attitude, and the guy understood that he really wanted to see her, and most of all look at her expression. Finally, the young man asked her to tell him her name after she lifted the curse. The girl was a little surprised by this, because she thought that Mikael had already found out everything about her. Bersha immediately replied that he had no intention of digging under it, and said that if the owner of such a powerful force had not yet been represented in society, there were reasons for this. He assured her that if she didn't want to tell him anything about herself, he wouldn't insist, but he was sure that the girl would tell him everything someday. Liarte was amazed at how caring Mikael was, and was grateful for it, so she promised to tell him everything before his sight returned. The next morning, the girl decided to take advantage of her family's permission to go outside during the day, so she went to the library to get a book about water powers. Walking down the corridor, she couldn't help but be surprised, because before that she had only heard bad things about Bircha, but all those rumors turned out to be false. She thought that the reason for this was her rebirth. When she reached the library, she went inside, inhaling the aroma of printed books. The girl looked at everything carefully, because she hadn't been here for a long time. She used to come here often, hiding from relatives who hated her. However, after the incident when the Duke found her here, she stopped coming. Exhaling heavily, she began looking for a book in which she could find something about Mikael's treatment methods, because the more seals she removed, the more difficult it became to control the force. While she was looking for the book she needed, someone was secretly spying on her. Suddenly, the stranger raised his voice, and the girl immediately turned to him. Vehemen Elheim approached her, but it was clear that he was embarrassed to come any closer. Besides her and her twin brother, they had 3 older brothers. The first was Ainlius, the second was Thandarian, and the third was Vehemen. They were almost the same age as the third and often played together as children. But then their relationship fell apart. One day, the older brother found some books and immediately called his sister to look at them. This was forbidden knowledge that Vehemen began to study in secret from his father. Liarte, knowing nothing, also began to read it with him, but this secret did not last long. One day, their father found out that they were studying something forbidden, so he caught them in the library by surprise. In turn, the brother began to deny his involvement in this, and the Duke began to ask whose initiative it was. Without any hesitation, the boy immediately pointed out his sister's guilt. At that time, she was shocked and could not say anything. She understood that the Duke knew about her brother's lie, because where could a little girl have the strength to steal forbidden books? But despite this, the Duke still decided to punish her. Instead of the usual beating, her father liked to inflict injuries on her with the force of water. After that, they couldn't communicate normally. If there were no other relatives around, Viaman would throw a few words at her. Her brother asked her about her mood, talked about the weather. Everything was exactly like it is now. His brother awkwardly circled around and asked her about her business, but before he could even finish, Liart interrupted him, asking why he was glowing in front of her. Even before her rebirth, that situation had caused her great trauma, and she was afraid of her brother, but now she felt nothing. He said he had heard about the attack, and that she had been unconscious for some time and wanted to ask how she was doing. The sister paid no attention to this as she walked past. Viaman tried to sleep with her. He wanted to apologize for the mistake he made in his childhood. However, the girl did not want to apologize, because she understood very well that her brother was only worried about himself and wanted to apologize in order to get rid of the burden of guilt. The sister understood that her brother wanted to show himself to be a good person that day, which is why he blamed her. The boy had nothing to say to that. The girl said that there was no point in apologizing to her, because she was not going to forgive him. She turned to leave, and her brother grabbed her hand to stop her, but she immediately pulled it away. She only gave him one last shout to continue being a good child, calling him a hypocrite. Viaman no longer tried to stop her. Meanwhile, it was already evening outside. A knight came to Mikael's room to report on the spirit stone, which had already awakened. The young lord wanted proof of this, but the knight replied that he had reported what he had heard and seen, so there was no evidence. He only asked to believe him, because at the beginning of the investigation he was on the verge of death. However, the knight understood that the young lord had no reason to believe him and was sure that he would be sent there again. However, to his surprise, Mikael only said that there was nothing to be done and that he should write to his father about it in a letter and also ask about this stone. The knight thought that the curse had driven his master completely mad, but suddenly he noticed that he was in a good mood, and Birch confirmed this because now was the time for her arrival. The guy immediately understood that it was about the awakened one, so the reason for the gentleman's good mood was precisely in her, so he hurried to leave the room and send the letter. He was alone for a while, but suddenly he heard footsteps. He smiled as he turned to the strangers, who were already holding their daggers at the ready. The boy assured his opponents that he would only need one dagger to deal with them. In addition, he himself understood that he could not use force, as it would attract the Duke's attention. He could also use a firearm, but then the sounds of gunshots would be heard everywhere. So he decided to deal with everything quietly, and at that moment he was attacked, but he repelled the blow. Mikael was not at all concerned about the attackers, but he wondered what the purpose of whoever had sent these assassins was. He was certain that it was not the Duke's doing. Nevertheless, the killer still got here, so it was likely that the true enemy was trying to divide Birke and the Elheims. A moment later, Liarte entered the room and the boy told her that she was a little late and asked her to wait outside until he sorted everything out. However, Mikael suddenly noticed that the enemies simply stood still and did not move. He quickly realized that the girl was the cause. Keeping the attackers under control, she asked if he was okay. He took off the blindfold and smiled and said that it couldn't have been otherwise, but emphasized that he had asked her to stay outside. The girl only said that he was in danger. Suddenly, she noticed that he was wounded and assured him that she would heal the wound as soon as it was all over. He turned away from her touch in an instant. Even in such a situation, the girl was worried only about him. Her actions did not meet his expectations at all, which made his heart flutter. Finally, the boy focused on the confrontation, which was not yet over. The young man turned to the girl, telling her to stay behind. However, before he could take a step, the enemies began to fall apart. Lady immediately shouted to him to move away. Mikael immediately turned to her, asking if it was her doing, but she immediately replied that she had no part in it. Finally, she approached the remains left behind by the murderers and thought that this was also a curse, but she was surprised that after such a thing, no traces remained. Then she thought it might be some ancient magic, but she couldn't focus on it because the boy distracted her by asking what it could be. She immediately responded with uncertainty. At this, he thanked her for her help and said that he would entrust the rest to his knights. The girl agreed and told them to be careful. The girl was in no hurry to leave the room because now she had to remove another seal. The guy did not resist, and the lady got to work. Mikael calculated that the girl had already dealt with 2 seals and had 5 more to go. He suddenly wished time would stop. Sometime before this attack, someone had been arguing loudly in a palace on the other side of the country. Looking at the remains, one would have thought that it wouldn't be able to keep up. Then Crown Prince Lucas Franz said it was better to throw it away then. At this, the magician asked what to do with the puppets that had already been sent to Elheim. The prince replied that he no longer needed them, as he had used them to sow suspicion in Birch and Elheim. The magician said that they did not yet know about Mikhail's rise in the duchy, and the prince suggested that the two could begin to cooperate, but the magician assured that the duke would not be able to lift the curse so easily. The prince was reassured by those words, because he himself understood that he had put a lot of effort into this curse, so the duke could not remove it just like that, unless he thought that Leandricius could do it. After this, the prince was ordered to quickly find an excuse to visit the duchy of Elheim and told to send a letter there. Meanwhile, the duke gathered a small gathering of the awakened and began to inquire about the condition of the spirit stone. He was told that the stone was glowing brightly and beating like a heart. Aeneas was sure that awakening was not far off and said that it was thanks to Leon. The boy himself sat silently, not answering anything. The young man was lost in his thoughts and not immediately heard his father calling him. The man said that he would soon come of age, so it was time to find him a wife. The elder brother received a letter from the crown prince requesting a visit to the duchy. Aen thought it was an opportunity to discuss his engagement to Princess Ninian. Leanne didn't care who it was. He thought the princess was a good candidate, because he knew she had liked him since childhood. She was easy to deal with, but his sister was harder to deal with. However, he couldn't help but see that his sister had changed a lot now and began to wonder where he had made a mistake. At this point, it was decided that no one would be against this engagement, and the older brother asked his father when he thought it would be best to invite the prince. The man replied that it would be best to invite him to the wedding after Michael's greetings. A few days passed, and Liart had 2 more seals to remove. That's exactly what she did. However, she replied that this time removing the seal would be more difficult and would take more time than usual. The day before, he had talked to the knight, and the knight was worried that despite the fact that the lord could now see at least a little, there was still a danger of not noticing the killers at the hunting competitions. Although the young man understood that Elheim disliked Bersha, he understood that organizing hunting competitions to congratulate the blind man was too much, but he even found it funny. After a while, another seal was removed. When she finished, the girl began to call out to Mikhail and, coming even closer, asked if he could see her anymore. The guy could clearly see the lady. She leaned over a little to make sure he was really feeling better. The young man quickly turned away so the lady wouldn't see his expression. He quickly pulled himself together and, turning to the girl, said that after removing another seal, he was finally able to see her. Mikhail took her hand and kissed it, saying that Bersha would not forget her gesture, because she had restored the heir's sight. Although the last seal was still left, the boy reminded her of his promise to fulfill whatever the savior wished. The girl wondered what she really wanted. She wanted not to repeat the mistakes of her past life. That was the only thing Liarte wanted now. However, she didn't know if she could do it alone, or if even Mikhail could really help her. Finally, she decided to give her name, but she did not say out loud that she was considered a disgrace in the duchy. She was born unawakened and therefore considered inferior. Liarte firmly declared to young Birch that the only thing she wanted was to be free from the bonds of her family, which is why she helped him. The boy was silent for a moment, then said that she had a beautiful name. Standing up, the young man approached her and promised that he would help her escape from the Elheims. After that, they went out onto the balcony to relax a bit and get some fresh air. Mikhail started a conversation and started talking a little about himself. He paused for a moment as he looked at her somewhat distracted state. He thought he had talked too much, so he wanted the lady to tell him something about herself, but she gave her name again. He tried to ask what she might have liked or disliked. The guy asked if the lady liked animals, birds, but Liart herself didn't know what she liked or didn't like. A moment later, the young man turned to her again, distracting her from her thoughts, and she saw small white birds circling around him. He explained that these birds were used by Bersha to deliver letters. One bird flew to her and he asked her if she liked them. The girl smiled and confirmed. After that, the boy asked her when she wanted to leave Elheim and said that they could escape now, but the girl refused because by law she could not leave the duchy until she came of age. She continued and said that if they were careless, the entire empire might rise up against Birch, but these words did not frighten the boy at all. Nevertheless, he understood that as soon as the hunting competitions were over, he would have to leave the duchy, but Liarti would not be able to go with him. Standing up, he said that in that case he would help her leave the duchy on the day she came of age. The girl agreed to wait. The next day, one of her older brothers returned to Elheim. The boy looked around the residence and noticed that nothing had changed. Einlius was already waiting for him at the entrance and immediately scolded the younger man for being late. However, Thandarian paid no attention to his older brother's grumbling and only asked where the spirit stone was now. The second son himself was always different from his relatives. He hated the achromatic color of the Elheim's hair, so he always dyed it. He also went to the palace to personally guard Ninian. The younger one asked to show him where the stone was, and Ain said that if he was so interested, he should have come running as soon as he received the letter, to which the second one said that he was busy. When they arrived at the dungeon where the spirit stone was kept, both were very surprised at how brightly it shone, and Thandarian asked if it had always been like this, but the elder replied that this was the first time. The second tried to approach the stone and even wanted to touch it, but he stopped and his hand began to tremble. The awakened families of Elheim, even if they did not create the water themselves, could control it. This was called the capture. However, the boy noticed that he could not control the water that filled this room, and this magic was becoming even stronger. Suddenly, the stone shone even brighter, and even Ain could not do anything, not understanding what was happening to the stone. The light became so bright that it was impossible to look at it anymore, but in a moment everything stopped and the room was enveloped in smoke, from which an unfamiliar creature emerged towards the boys. The unknown creature began to ask where the one who woke him up was. The guys stood silently, not understanding who was in front of them, because a simple person could not achieve such power. Even more water waves began to rise around the creature, and the boys slowly retreated, unable to tell whether they were facing a deity or a monster. Ain tried to find out who the creature was, but the spirit angrily replied that he was the first to ask the question and threw a strong wave of water at the boys, and they barely had time to take cover. The spirit lifted the boys above the ground and did not let go, holding the water in its bonds. It spoke, saying that it was the 10th weapon of Lord Rayard and the first contractor of Durin. Thandarian was quite surprised to hear about the contractor, knowing that he was the first owner of the spirit stone. The creature noticed the concern of one of the boys and said that he was called the Spirit King. The spirit noticed that they were descendants of Durin, but said that their power was rather weak. Finally, having released them, the spirit again asked the question, "Where is the one who woke him up?" The boys only trembled silently. Thandarian understood that if he did not give the spirit an answer, it would scatter them like insects. But he did not have time to say anything, because his older brother replied that the one who was needed was not there at the moment. The boy asked if he should be brought here, but the Spirit King, after a moment of silence, replied that it was not necessary at the moment, and ordered to bring the heir of Durin in 3 days, after which he disappeared into the stone. The boys stood in shock, and Thandarian assumed the spirit had fallen asleep again. 3 days later, that would have been the day after the feast and hunting contests had ended. Taking one last look at the stone, Ain said that everything had to be reported to his father immediately. With that, the boys left the dungeon. After that, he and the Duke again came to the door of the room, but this time it did not open, and Elheim scolded his sons that at least one of them should not stay there, but the second replied that they would be killed. The eldest son assured them that if they returned here again with Lian in 3 days, the door would definitely open. The Duke thought for a moment and said that recently his younger son had been chasing his sister around and had even invited her hunting, but he hoped that his older brothers would not allow this. The Duke also wanted to hide the awakening of the Spirit King, and most of all from Bircha. So the day of the hunting competition arrived. Mikkel was already there, and among the crowd he saw Liarte, who was talking to her brother about something. The boy felt that he didn't like Lian, but Duke Elheim distracted him from his thoughts by asking the young lord how he was doing. The young man immediately replied that he was fine, but in order not to show himself in public, he had a bandage on. He had 1 more seal left, and there were almost no problems with his eyesight, but the Duke did not know about it. Although Birch understood the Duke's true intentions in this regard, looking back at the girl and her brother, he realized that he had a completely different task. After talking to her brother, Liarte sat down in the shade of a tree. She was surprised by her brother's behavior recently, because he even invited her to a competition, which he had not done in his past life. Before that, he approached her and said that he would hunt game for her and asked who she wanted, but the lady did not know how to respond. Grabbing her hand, her brother told her to think about it. A little confused, she replied that she wanted the silver fox but asked not to kill it. At this he smiled and gave his sister his word that he would keep his promise. Liarte couldn't understand what was going on in her brother's head, because she deliberately named the animal that was the most difficult to catch. Before her reincarnation, she had always wanted to hear such words from Lian, but now it only irritated her. Suddenly, someone called out to her, distracting her from her thoughts. The girl immediately turned around and saw Mikael standing in front of her, smiling warmly. Approaching, he sat down next to her, and the lady immediately asked how he had found her. The guy replied that he immediately thought that if he came here, he would meet her. However, he couldn't really admit that he was following her scent, which had drifted away on the wind. She asked him about the condition of her eyes. The guy replied that everything was fine and immediately pointed to her hand, indicating the mark her brother had left. Liarte didn't even notice it and said it didn't hurt because she had long been used to it. Mikael replied that you can't get used to this. He wouldn't want the girl to get used to the pain. The girl didn't even know how to respond to that, so she simply asked why the young man had come, and he replied that he simply missed her. It was strange for her to hear this, because the others saw her as only unawakened, and Mikael had followed her. After a moment of silence, she smiled and said that she was glad he had come. Her kind smile made the young man immediately stand up, saying that it was probably time for him to go, and he immediately asked if the lady would be present at the banquet. She thought for a moment, remembering that her brother had also invited her. She replied that she would come if Mikael was there too. The young man immediately agreed, and besides, he would like to dance with her, but the lady replied that she did not know how. Bersha promised to teach her, and having said goodbye, left for the banquet. Meanwhile, Lian followed the trail of a silver fox in the forest, carefully examining each trace left by the animal. When he told his relatives about his desire to find the fox, his brothers were surprised, and his father was not a little skeptical about it, because the prey was not easy. Todd and the boy asked his father what he knew about these animals. The Duke replied that this species had to be destroyed by order of their ancestor, and almost all of them became extinct. Looking at the piece of fur, the boy thought that it might be the last of its kind of silver fox, but remembering his sister's wish, he promised himself that he would definitely catch it. Lian hoped that if he fulfilled his sister's wish, she would become what she was again. Suddenly he heard some sounds, and pushing back the leaves of the bushes, he saw a small silver fox behind them. He slowly began to approach to catch the animal. Suddenly, something flew past the fox, and it started howling loudly. The animal's scream scared even Lian. He thought the fox had been killed, but he quickly noticed that it had simply fainted. Suddenly, someone approached the animal. The guy asked Birch what he was doing, and Mikael simply walked up to the unconscious animal and picked it up. The young gentleman only replied to Lian that his hunting skills left much to be desired, because even being blind, he was better at it. As he passed by young Elheim, he told him to be more careful next time, because no one knew what might be taken from him next time. Lian was very angry at these words, understanding what Birch was leading to, but this time he decided to remain silent, although he was not going to accept defeat. At the residence, the girl was sitting in her room and looking at the box containing the banquet dress her brother had given her. In her past life, she had never had a formal dress. In addition, the arrival of the crown prince at the banquet was also strange. This had never happened before. She opened the box and saw the dress, remarking that it was beautiful. The girl thought that in a past life she would have liked it. Looking at herself in the mirror, she noticed that her hair was unkempt and her dress was gray and uninviting. She even found it a bit funny because in the past she would not have felt any sympathy for this. However, now she has made a promise to herself that for her own sake she will become the author of her own future. The evening came after the hunting competition, and the carriages of guests slowly began to arrive at the Duke's residence. Princess Ninian got out of the last carriage and immediately rushed to Lian, who was waiting for her. He greeted the princess, and the crown prince came out after his sister, and the young gentleman thanked him for the visit. The hall was already full of guests. Music was playing. The 3 older Elheim brothers came out to meet the younger one. Ain approached the prince and greeted him. Lucas reciprocated and also announced that he had received the previous gift. His Majesty said he heard about today's hunting competition. Elder Elheim confirmed and reported that everything went well. Although the interlocutor smiled and assured that everything went well, the prince could not help but notice that something was wrong, and he became curious about what really happened at the competition. The prince was also curious about where Bircha himself was, and looking around, noticed him leaning against the wall. Franz could not help but be glad that the curse was still in effect when he saw the bandage on Mikhail's eyes. The sister noticed that her brother was thinking about something and asked about it. The prince replied that he was sorry to give his sister in marriage to Liane. The lady laughed at this. The girl also whispered to her brother that her future fiancé was not in a good mood today. She said that she had only asked about his sister and would like to meet her too, but was met with a gloomy look from young Elheim. The prince said nothing to this, but he knew that Liarte was the most similar to the true heiress, but not awakened. That was why the duke hated her. Suddenly, all the guests' eyes turned to the stairs. It was from there that Lady Elheim was descending. Everyone was quite surprised. Ain couldn't take his eyes off his sister. The girl began to remind him very much of his mother. The girl apologized to all the guests for being late. Princess Ninian was completely taken aback by Liarte's appearance. The brothers also couldn't believe what they were seeing. The younger one noticed that their sister had never worn such dresses before. Thandarian noticed that her behavior was befitting the ideal daughter of an aristocrat. Lian couldn't help but notice his sister, but he remembered how, when she was little, she had tried so hard to hide the fact that she wasn't awake. His sister always craved love from her family, even if they treated her badly, and the more she tried to fit in, the more ridiculous she seemed to him. However, now it was difficult for him to understand why his sister had started looking at him with such an icy gaze. He wanted to ask her to dance, but before he could get close, Birch jumped out in front of him and himself invited Liarte to dance with him. This angered Leon, and he even remembered the words Mikhail had told him in the forest at the hunting competition to be careful, because you never know when something could be taken from you. The lady only looked at the outstretched hand for a moment, then accepted it, and said that she was happy to accept the offer. Young Elheim didn't expect his sister to accept the offer. He suddenly realized that the girl would no longer run after him, as she had done in childhood. Music started playing, and the couple danced around. The girl asked if her partner liked the song that was playing. He said that he had liked it before and complimented the lady. While she was dancing, she accidentally caught the eye of the prince, who was standing alone watching the guests circle around. In a past life, the Imperial family dealt with ancient potions and magic. The assassins who arrived at the banquet that time, Michael's loss of sight, his transformation into powder by ancient magic. All this ancient magic that couldn't be used unless you were a member of the Imperial family, but I didn't know if that meant they were behind it all. The girl suddenly realized that the prince had come to the ball today to make sure of Birch's curse, so she asked him if it was okay for him to dance so openly. He didn't immediately understand what she meant, and then the lady clarified that the culprit of his curse was in the hall. Mikhail smiled because he wanted to tell her later, but he saw that Liart had already guessed. Finally, he said that he didn't care because the curse was obvious. Instead, the young man suggested that she move in with the Birch family as soon as she came of age. Lady had not yet answered this question. Meanwhile, Lian kept an eye on his sister, and her closeness to Mikhail irritated him. He promised himself that he would never let his sister leave the duchy, and that when he himself grew up and took his father's place, he would chain Liarte to the Elheims forever. The princess exhaled and leaned slightly against Lian, saying that her legs hurt, so she took the guy a little to the side. Ahead, she saw her brother and the duke talking about something, and immediately assumed it was about their marriage. The prince said he could have already sent the marriage papers and the duke had already agreed, but Liam raised his voice from behind, stopping both of them. The boy said he wanted to wait until he was of age before arranging a marriage. The duke was shocked by what he heard. At this, Lucas smiled secretly and praised the young man somewhat in front of the duke. In turn, Elheim assured him that his son was simply worried about the princess. When the conversation ended and Lian and the princess moved away a little, the girl hurried to thank the guy for what he had said for her sake. The boy didn't answer, because it wasn't for the princess's sake. He understood that he was currently the strongest of the awakened in the family, and therefore, as soon as he became the heir, he would do everything to prevent his sister from escaping. The next day, Liar went into the room. She hadn't been in a long time. This was the place where the duke raised the children. The girl recalled how her father repeatedly brought her here to show her where she belonged. And then the door opened loudly, and an angry duke stood on the threshold, but the girl didn't even turn to him. However, the duke paid no attention to this, and immediately asked his daughter why she had danced with Birch yesterday, demanding an explanation. Finally, Liarta turned around and asked why she could not do it. In turn, the duke was very surprised when he saw his calm daughter, and felt that something had changed in her, because before that she had always been a frightened child. The man thought this was some new trick his daughter was playing to get attention, so he started shouting loudly that she knew how much he disliked Bersha. He was emphasizing that she shouldn't even try to get his attention, because he had never treated her as a family member or as a daughter. These words struck the girl. But she quickly forced herself to calm down and replied that his words did not surprise or shock her. After all, she did not consider him her father either. The man couldn't believe she said such words because the girl had worked hard since childhood to gain recognition in her family. The Duke did not understand how this could have happened and still did not believe that Liarte could have said these words and thought that his daughter did not understand what she was talking about. However, the lady understood well what she was talking about and repeated her father's words that she was not considered a member of the family, and therefore did not understand why she had to follow the rules and hate Birchie. The Duke was very angry about this, and the girl remembered that whenever she found herself in the disciplinary room, she always had to listen to the notations until her ears hurt. However, she also knew that this was her father's wife's room, her favorite room, but she also couldn't forget her father's words, blaming her for her mother's death because she was born unawakened. Nevertheless, Liarte heard that the Duke's wife's condition was not very good after giving birth to 3 children, and after she gave birth to her with Lian, she passed away. And yet she didn't believe her mother would ask her to take revenge on the child who killed her, so she replied that if the Duke had nothing more to say, she would leave. Left alone, the Duke remembered his wife's last words, that they had a beautiful daughter and that she asked her husband to love all their children. However, the Duke persisted in these words and was certain that he had lost his beloved wife because she had given birth without waking up. It seemed that the Duke would lose his mind from despair, but he quickly forced himself to calm down, for he was sure that Liart would never awaken his strength. In the evening, the girl came to Bershu again and removed the last mark. Now the curse was completely lifted. Mikael thanked her. However, he noticed that the girl was not in a good mood today and asked what was the matter. The lady replied that she had visited the disciplinary room during the day. He quickly examined her but saw no signs of beating. Still, he didn't want to question her about it, so he just decided to ask if she was okay. The young man offered her a place to lean on if she got tired, but the lady did not immediately respond to his offer, but after a moment, she threw herself into his arms. A moment later, she said that in that room she had told the Duke that she did not feel like a part of their family. Mikael was surprised, because it was the first time the lady had spoken about what was on her mind. In this case, the guy decided to support the girl and, hugging her tighter, praised her for her courage. After a moment, the boy decided to ask what exactly the Elheims had done to her. The girl stepped back a little and looked at him in surprise. The girl didn't know where to start, but the first thing she remembered was how, as a child, she had somehow fainted and then regained consciousness in the snow near a house. And even though she was left with a lot of food when she was still little, she felt abandoned and lonely. The girl suggested that they didn't want to kill her then, but they wanted to hide her away from human eyes. She continued and said that after a long time they took her away, but so that she would become a tool. She said that if it weren't for that, she probably would have stayed in that mountain house. But thinking about it now, the lady thought it would be better for her to stay there. However, her pain did not end there, and she continued to say that it was very difficult for her to live in the residence, because she was constantly scolded and punished, while the other brothers remained indifferent to this. Liarte continued and said that even with everything they did to her, she still tried her best to become part of the family, but right now she didn't care about anything related to the Elheims. As soon as she finished, Mikael called her, and, without letting her do anything, quickly hugged the lady. The girl was a little surprised, but the young man in turn gave her his word that he would release her from this place. She didn't even want to break free, because it was the first time someone had hugged her like that. Hearing his words, the girl was sure that the guy would hold them back, so she simply thanked him for everything. Breaking the hug, Mikael immediately asked her if there was anything she wanted to do when she ran away. The girl thought for a moment, then replied that she wanted to see the sea. He held out his hand to her and promised that on the day of her coming of age he would take the girl to see the sea. Finally, the day came when the Elheims were to come to the Spirit King again. Getzrog ordered Ein to open the door. Without any problems, the door opened and everyone went inside. The Duke paused for a moment and looked before him. When he first heard of the awakening of the Spirit King, he could not have imagined what power he would have, and this power definitely belonged to a spirit. The eldest son approached first and, bowing, said to the King of Spirits that, as agreed, they had brought the true owner of the stone. The spirit glanced at Lian and said displeasedly that he was not the one who could awaken him. Silence fell in the room, and the spirit became very angry that the wrong person had been brought to him. The water swirled around him in waves. The Spirit King was about to throw these waves at the guests and emphasized again that they had brought the wrong person. Lian, greatly surprised, began to retreat. The Spirit King became even more angry when he realized that they had deliberately tried to deceive him by bringing this fake. The creature wanted to destroy everyone who was in front of it, but the Duke managed to speak up and said that he did not understand what the spirit was talking about, because he was sure that his son was the true owner. For a moment, the Spirit King paused, because he really noticed that the people in front of him really didn't understand anything, but he himself felt that somewhere nearby was the rebirth of Jurin. After this, the spirit said that the true owner of the stone was in this palace, and ordered that he be brought to him immediately. The Duke bowed with fear in his eyes and promised to carry out the order, but he did not understand at all who could be the true master if it was not Lian. After that, all the awakened ones were brought to the King of Spirits one by one, but the creature only sent them back. The Duke could not understand where he had made a mistake, and so when his eldest son suggested bringing the younger awakened ones, he did not object. Bane noticed that Lian didn't say anything the whole time, and so he decided to support his brother and told him not to worry. Even if he wasn't the owner of the stone, he was still the future Duke. The eldest assured him that he had no claim to the position. Then the Duke asked his second son if he would return to the palace. Thandarayan replied that the princess had already left, and therefore it was time for him to go too. Suddenly, one of the knights entered the office and announced that Birch was also about to leave the residence. The Duke was somewhat surprised, as he had thought that he would stay longer. The sun was already setting when Birch's assistant was waiting for the young gentleman by the carriage. The knight said that they still had plenty of time and asked if it was worth going so quickly. Mikael replied that the curse had been lifted and he still had some things to prepare. Lian approached the carriage and said that when he learned of Birch's departure, he had come to see him off. Mikael was somewhat surprised. However, in a moment he smiled slyly and said that thanks to the Elheims the journey back would be easy, and all the days he had spent here had been quite fun. Lian noticed the fox in his opponent's hands and asked if he was taking it with him. Birch smiled again and confirmed, saying that he always takes his own with him. Getting into the carriage, the young gentleman said goodbye to young Elheim until they met again. But the young man was not sure that they would meet again, and a moment later he emphasized that his sister did not know this either. Michael did not answer, but was sure that the duchy would certainly see him again. With that, closing the door, the carriage set off. The girl got out of bed to greet the morning. Several months had already passed since young Birch's departure. Nothing special had happened since that day, except that Lian had changed her room. It was an ordinary aristocratic room, so there was nothing more to be desired. Lian came into the room, but the girl wasn't very happy to see her brother and just asked why he had come. The guy wondered if there was a reason to visit her sister. Finally, the brother said that the coming-of-age ceremony was coming up soon and asked if his sister wanted anything, to which Liarte said that it was his ceremony, and she didn't understand why he was interested in her. Lian just asked why his sister kept staring at the window as if she was about to leave this place, and said that it made him feel uneasy. The guy asked her if she wanted to run away from here, but with a chuckle he told her that it would never happen. Then he emphasized that even if his sister died, he would never leave the duchy. The girl was furious at these words. However, she quickly forced herself to calm down, remembering Mikael's promise and thinking that this time her brother was wrong, because she would not repeat the mistakes of her past life. Meanwhile, in the Imperial palace, Princess Ninian was calling out for Thandarayan everywhere, but he was nowhere to be found when he suddenly appeared before her. The girl started to argue because he appeared so suddenly and emphasized that she had asked him not to use invisibility. While the princess was scolding him, Elheim noticed that the prince was talking to someone and, accidentally noticing the stranger's face, became interested in this. In turn, the princess wanted to tell her about the new maid, but when she returned to Thandarayan, she didn't notice him nearby, because he had disappeared somewhere again. Meanwhile, the prince was descending into the dungeon, and the stranger said that Lian's coming-of-age ceremony was just around the corner. The prince knew that the date was in 3 days and was sure that his sister would be happy about it, so they approached the huge metal gate. The gate opened and the stranger froze, noticing that someone was behind them. Lucas said to look more closely, because it was the other half of the Spirit King, which had been passed down from generation to generation. The prince turned to Count Fades and said that he wanted to make the spirit complete and take possession of its power, so that even the awakened one could not influence the imperial power. The count quickly agreed with him, and the prince immediately turned to him to give him the bottle. The boy was somewhat surprised that this time His Majesty wanted to do everything himself. Lucas looked at him a little angrily, because the count had probably forgotten about the abilities of the Imperial family, namely that those with crimson eyes were not affected by the curse or the powers of the awakened. Fades gave the jar back, but still asked to be careful. The prince set it aside and began to collect black pollen, which had a special power. All it took was a breath or a touch of it, and a living creature would immediately lose its mind. Having collected the required amount, the prince turned around and immediately asked about Bersha. The count replied that, according to rumors, he was still sitting behind closed gates. When the prince and the count left, Thandarayan finally weakened his magic. He now understood that His Majesty was hiding another spirit king. The day before the coming-of-age ceremony, the second son arrived in the county and was unpleasantly surprised that the family had not yet found the spirit master. His father confirmed that no awakened one had come forward. The guy was disappointed because he had come home under the guise of his brother's ceremony, although he really wanted to find out how things were going with the awakened ones. Although he didn't feel the same power from the Queen of Spirits as he did from the king, he made himself understand that these two were still worth keeping a close eye on. Suddenly, Leon raised his voice and asked his father what he would do with Liart after she came of age. Ain was surprised that his brother had mentioned her again, as if he were obsessed with it. The Duke replied that if his son, after coming of age, could use force without his sister, then she would no longer be needed and he would expel her from the residence. To this, young Elheim replied that this could not be done and that she should be kept here. The father explained that if the girl did not want to live here after she came of age, then, according to the law, they would not be able to keep her. Leon said that then they could lock her up and reminded her that Liarte belonged to him, so where did she get the rights now? Thandarayan supported his younger brother and told him to break his sister's morals. Ayan was against it, because he understood that his younger brother was not the owner of the stone. The older brother remembered that the Spirit King had called Lian a fake, and when other awakened ones were brought to him, he had replied that this was not what was needed. And yet, the Spirit called the youngest of the brothers a fake, but he saw that he could do nothing now, so in the end he also said that let the brother do whatever he wanted. Under cover of night, Liarte hid in the hallway. Her brother's ceremony was to begin tomorrow, so she wanted to find out everything. She rushed to the dungeon gate because she knew that all the awakened people had been brought there recently, so she was sure that something had happened there. The girl stopped in front of the gate, knowing that only a direct descendant of the awakened could open it. The door opened in front of her without any problems. The lady went inside and immediately found herself in front of the Spirit King, who seemed to have fallen into a slumber. She carefully examined the creature and was sure that it was the one she had seen before her rebirth. The Spirit King opened his eyes and immediately rushed to Liarte, rejoicing that she had finally come. He called her his mistress and said that she had made a deal with him. The girl was quite surprised by his words. The girl assured that nothing of the kind had happened, but the spirit confirmed that it had, and touching her hand, revealed a mark. The lady was very surprised to see the mark. The Spirit King explained that she had deliberately engraved this mark on her soul so that the creature would recognize her when she was reborn, and said that Liarte was the reincarnation of Jurin, the true mistress. The girl clarified why she was the reincarnation of the first mistress. The spirit did not answer this question, only touched her hand again to read her memories. The King of Spirits was very angry at what he saw and did not mind tearing everyone to pieces, because they did not know who the real mistress was, but held on to the fake one. The Spirit King was ready to wipe all these people off the face of the earth immediately, but the girl did not allow it and said that they were not worth it. She wanted to leave this place tomorrow. The lady asked to keep their meeting a secret. The spirit already knew that she was supposed to go to Bersh and would have liked to go with her, but he couldn't, because he had split into two parts a long time ago and sealed them. So he explained that he couldn't leave this place, otherwise the seal would break. The girl was about to ask about the seal, but suddenly she heard voices outside. Liarte said that she had to leave quickly, and the spirit did not hold her back, only regretting that he could not go with her, but wishing her happiness. The lady thanked her and assured her that they would meet again. When the girl came out of the dungeon, the spirit could no longer hold back its emotions, and promised to take revenge on these people for what they had done to the lady before. Finally, the day of the ceremony arrived. All the guests had a great time dancing. Viamin stood next to Lian and noticed that Liart had also come to the ceremony. But for the latter, it was normal, because she was his twin, and it was her holiday too. However, the older brother did not understand why knights were assigned to his sister, as if she were a thief. The younger brother replied that it was necessary, and yet the older brother tried to say that it was wrong to treat a family member like that. But the birthday boy didn't like that his older brother considered the girl to be family. At this, Viamin quickly agreed with his brother's words and hurried to leave him. Lian glanced at his sister in passing, satisfied that that was where she belonged. Princess Ninian approached him and modestly wished him a happy birthday. The ominous expression instantly disappeared from the boy's face, and he thanked him with a smile. The princess was glad that the ceremony had finally come and couldn't wait for the conversation about their engagement to finally come up again. The young man, in turn, again stopped paying attention to the interlocutor and kept looking in the direction of his sister. Liart noticed that his brother was constantly following her. The girl glared at the guard her brother had placed around her under the guise of concern. For a moment she felt sad, remembering Bersha's words. The lady hoped that Mikael would still be able to help. She was just thinking about this when one of the knights ran to Duke Elheim and reported that an unknown carriage had arrived at the palace and assumed that it was Bersha. Before the Duke could give any instructions on this, Michael entered the hall, accompanied by his knight, and was glad that the ceremony was not yet over. It became quiet around, and the Imperial family was also very surprised by his arrival, but the prince was shocked to notice that the cursed one no longer had his bandage on. The Duke could not allow such arbitrariness and reprimanded Birche for invading the duchy. The guy didn't show a shadow of concern and simply said he came for something he had forgotten here. Michael quickly found Liarte with his eyes and, apologizing for being late, extended his hand and invited her to go with him to his duchy. The girl was amazed that he kept his word. The guy apologized to her for being late and slowly started to approach her, promising to go see the sea. However, he had no time to approach her when he was stopped by the torrents of water. Birch and the lady looked around. These streams of power were released by Lian, who firmly declared that the opponent would not be able to take his sister away from him. Young Elheim said he would not allow what was his to be taken away, so he aimed his magic to destroy his opponent. Mikael stood fearlessly, waiting for the blow. Ain himself wanted to do something to prevent it, but he didn't have time because other streams of water reflected Lian's blow. Everyone started looking around in search of who the power could be. Streams of water swirled around Liart, and the girl only told her brother to behave himself. The lady passed by Birch, who stopped her for a moment, asking where she was going. The girl replied that she had something else to do before leaving. No longer paying attention to the other guests or her brothers, the girl approached the Duke. The man looked at his daughter in shock. Finally, she said that from that moment on, she was severing all ties with her family and with the duchy itself, and since she had reached adulthood, she could not be detained. For 21 years, including reincarnation, she had endured this entire life in hell, but now she had promised herself that she would never become anyone's thing. Not paying attention to anyone else, the girl turned to Mikael. Now she was ready to leave, and the guy didn't hesitate for a moment. Taking her hand, they walked to the exit. Finally, she was able to smile happily because now she was sure that she would be able to see the sea. While riding in the carriage, the young man could not find peace, because he saw that her family did not give the girl peace until the last moment. Duke Elheim himself was on the verge of falling to his knees before his daughter so that she would not leave them. Michael was sure that his relatives did not appreciate what they had, but Liart was not their thing. Suddenly, the lady's voice broke his thoughts. He looked at her and saw her smiling and saying that she couldn't believe she was finally free. He leaned slightly towards her and gently ran his hand over her cheek. This gesture surprised the lady a little, and the guy promised that he would help her forget everything that had happened to her before. The boy said he would be there, and the girl couldn't help but smile. Finally, the carriage stopped, and they were told that they had arrived. Michael asked if the lady was ready, and the girl firmly confirmed. The carriage doors opened, and before Liart's eyes appeared the boundless sea on which the setting sun fell. The girl smiled and kept repeating how beautiful the sea was. In a moment, she stood up and was about to throw herself at it, finally feeling truly free. It was almost night. The wind was getting colder, but Liarte seemed to pay no attention to it and kept looking at the waves coming to the shore. The guy approached her and told her that the sun had already set and asked if she liked the sea. The girl replied that she liked it very much and that it was more beautiful than described in books. She smiled and thanked him for it, and also asked him to take care of her in his duchy. The boy blushed at her words and quickly hid his face. He approached her and confessed that he had missed her terribly all this time. The girl also replied that she had missed him and reached out her hand to his face. The boy lightly touched her hand and pressed it to his cheek. Mikael wanted them to be together forever and to come to the sea again someday. That same evening, Leon was sitting in one of the rooms, and there was a complete mess in front of him. The guy kept thinking about where exactly he could have gone wrong. He concluded that the whole problem was with the Birch heir. If he had understood everything right away when the fox was taken from him, and Mikael was thrown out when he asked his sister to dance, none of this would have happened. He raised his head when he heard footsteps. The Duke stood before him, looking at his son with some displeasure. The Duke merely said that the ceremony that was supposed to be the greatest happiness for the Elheims had turned into this. With the force of his words, he turned his head to his eldest sons, who stood sullenly to the side. After that, the Duke asked Leanne if he had seen his sister's power, and he admitted that he had never seen such powerful magic before. The boy remained silent. Elheim said no more, only telling his sons to follow him. They came to the dungeon door to find out what had truly awakened the Spirit King. The Duke approached first and tried to speak to the creature, but the spirit met them with a far from happy look, thinking that it was the heiress Jurin who had come. The spirit immediately wanted to tear everyone to pieces, but the Duke asked to be lenient with them. At this, the man asked who was the real owner of the stone. The Spirit King exhaled heavily and asked if the Elheims themselves knew about Jurin's will. The Duke had already begun to quote, but the spirit cut him off because the words were incorrect. He himself decided to tell the story of the will. During the life of the first mistress of the stone, the gates of the Spirit Stone opened. At that time, spirits freely moved around the earth and interacted with humans, sharing their power with those who made a pact with them. Such people were called owners. There were also those who made deals not with ordinary spirits, but with kings. Such people were called awakened. The people and spirits were making good progress, but that was before the fall of one of the kings and the closing of the gates. Thandarayan was shocked by what he heard and immediately thought that the fall of one of the spirit kings meant the one who was currently in the prince's basement. With that, the creature finished the story and said that after that, all the spirits returned to their world, and the awakened ones could no longer use magic. The spirit also said that the Elheims retained the ability to use their powers thanks to Jurin, and like Liarte, the first mistress was unable to awaken her powers until she came of age. The Duke could not believe what he heard, and the spirit only smiled evilly and asked how they felt now that the girl had left them, as they had wished before. The Spirit King also pointed at Liana and said that she was not his sister. He was a fake and had sucked all the strength out of the girl while still in her mother's womb. The Duke was shocked by this confession. The spirit continued and said that even after birth, the brother had been doing everything he could to slowly destroy his sister. These words angered the boy. Then the spirit said that he forbade Elheim to use his power until Liarte was with them. There was a moment of silence, and then the Duke laughed wildly and said that they must return the girl. The sun was already shining outside, and Mikael began to wake the girl up, saying that they were almost there. The lady opened her eyes and looked out the window. She was pleasantly surprised when she finally saw what the Duchy of Birch looked like. The guy helped Liart out of the carriage and said that he wanted to warn her about something before getting in, but he didn't have time when someone's voice was heard next to them. Carmen Birscha, Mikael's father, came to them with open arms and was a little upset because he thought he would die from the long wait. The boy whispered an apology and said that his father really wanted to meet her, but he didn't have time to warn her. The girl bowed slightly and thanked him for the hospitality and invitation. The young man rushed to her and said that such gestures were not worthy of her. Carmen confirmed his son's words and added that on the contrary, they should have thanked her, because she had saved the heir from the curse, after which he kissed the lady's hand. The girl replied that it wasn't worth thanking, because on the contrary, Mikael had helped her a lot, and she looked at him with a grateful look. The Duke was glad to see the children happy, but in the end he interrupted them and invited them inside and said that he had prepared a surprise for the guest. The girl was a little surprised. Liarte was led to her chambers. The girl sat down on the bed and looked around a little. The room was luxurious, and although it was usual for the duchy, the lady was surprised that it had been prepared especially for her. Carmen said that the girl would understand everything about the gift when she entered the room. She wondered what he meant. There was a knock on the door, and the lady gave permission to enter. A maid appeared before her. The girl said that she would take care of her from today and introduced herself as Marilyn. Liarte was a little wary because she knew the name. In a past life, this was the girl who had single-handedly dealt with 100 soldiers during the attack on Elheim. The lady was sure that this was the girl in front of her, but she didn't understand why a hired killer had been assigned to her. Marilyn bowed slightly and said that although her skills might not be enough, she also asked to be taken care of, because her main task was to protect the lady and she would do it best. The maid said that the Duke himself had the same opinion, which is why he sent her. The maid also wanted to help the lady get used to it here, and then take her to the garden to meet the master. In the garden, the 2 birches were already waiting for Liarte, but the elder one behaved calmly, while the son was still restless, waiting for the girl. Finally, the door to the gazebo opened, and the men turned their heads to meet the girl. The lady modestly apologized for being late. Mikael wanted to rush to her, but his father stopped him and told his son to let the lady sit down first. The girl sat down at the table and was silent for a while. The boy said that he didn't know what Liarte liked, so he took a little of everything. The girl looked at the table, and there were a lot of delicious pastries in front of her. The young man thought that the girl didn't like it, but both birches were very shocked when the lady replied that it was the first time she had seen such dishes and didn't know how to eat them. The girl immediately smiled and promised to try to behave accordingly. For a moment, the guy felt very sorry that the lady had to go through such a thing. However, he smiled almost immediately and said that it was okay if she started learning everything little by little and promised to help, so he cut the cake himself and brought it to her. After tasting the cake, the girl immediately said that it was very delicious. Looking at the men's smiles, she couldn't help but smile. The tea party turned out to be amazing. It was getting late, and the girl was going to her rooms to sum up the tea party. She managed to taste chocolate and cakes for the first time. Everything was sweet and delicious. She didn't even notice how quickly time flew by. She hadn't even had time to take another step when suddenly someone's scream was heard, and the girl instantly turned around at the voice. After that, no more screams were heard, and the girl thought she had just dreamed it. But a moment later, someone screamed again. Marilyn noticed the lady's concern and said that she had even turned a little pale. Liarte replied that she had heard the beasts roar and asked if the maid herself had heard anything. The maid said that she had heard nothing, and besides, they did not keep any animals in the palace. The lady was a little upset, and the maid took her to her chambers. The girl did not resist. Meanwhile, someone's scream was heard again in the corridor, but this time no one heard it. Carmen was sitting in his office when he received a letter from the aristocrats, led by the Elheims. In the letter, they wrote that they wanted to take Liarte back. The Duke was not surprised, as his rivals had lost the most powerful awakened in recent times. Rolling up the letter, he asked Aleph how he should perceive the Crown Prince's intervention. The assistant replied that this should be reacted to accordingly, since the prince was one of those who sought Birch's downfall and even offered marriage to obtain the awakened one. Carmen thought it was foolish for the prince to consider marrying Liarte. They would not have allowed a child who had been treated horribly since she was a baby to return to that hell, even if it weren't for her help. The Duke strictly ordered Aleph not to bring these letters again, and told his assistant to warn them in advance that if they wrote anything like that again, they would lose their hands. The girl was already lying in bed, but she still couldn't sleep. It seemed to her as if everything was a dream, because if she hadn't come here, she wouldn't have seen so many amazing things. It seemed that now she understood the meaning of the Duke's words, because for Marilyn this place had become a pleasant home, because she had once been kidnapped by murderers and had not had such a life. If that group had not been destroyed, the girl would still be living in terror. The maid smiled and assured her that life would be much better for the lady here too. The lady could see that the maid was happy to live an ordinary life here, but in her past life she had been a fiery girl and didn't know what had made her change so much. She wanted to know, because then she could help prevent what might happen. If the Birches were really losing their minds, she had to figure it out. Suddenly, she heard someone screaming again and stood up abruptly. Now the girl was absolutely sure that she hadn't imagined it. She went to the window and looked out, peering at the place where she could roughly hear this terrible voice. Liarte wanted to find out what the reason was. The girl quickly gathered herself and went outside, but was met by a guard in front of the gate. The lady replied that she couldn't sleep and decided to take a walk. The guard wanted to escort her out in that case, but the girl tried to refuse. The guard said it wouldn't be a problem because there were already plenty of guards. The girl didn't want to argue, so she agreed. They began to walk around together, and the lady tried to figure out which gate the scream was coming from. When the scream was heard again, the girl rushed in the direction from where she had heard it. The guard tried to restrain her, but the lady did not listen to him and walked in the indicated direction. Liarte approached the door and was about to open it, but a familiar voice stopped her, and the girl turned around when she saw Duke Carmen. She never managed to get into the room because the Duke himself invited her for a night walk, and the lady was forced to agree, but she became curious about what Bersha was doing in the small mansion behind. The man noticed that the girl had many questions and asked what exactly she was interested in. The lady asked if he would give her answers. The Duke could not promise this, but said that he could give something. The Duke took something wrapped in paper from his pocket. The girl asked what it was, and the man replied that it was candy. Liarte took the candy and modestly thanked her for the treat. At this, the Duke asked what the girl was doing out on the street so late. The lady wondered if she could have told the truth, for Marilyn had not heard the same roar as she had. She was sure that the Duke hadn't heard anything either, so she decided to keep quiet about it and simply replied that she couldn't sleep and asked about his night outings. The Duke confirmed with a gesture that he also had some business, but looking at the girl, he replied that he could not tell her everything. Carmen gestured for the girl to turn around, and one of the guards quietly appeared in front of them. The chief told him to lead the girl to the chambers, and he immediately led the lady to her room. The lady gave the Duke a last quick glance, and he waved with a smile. The girl thought she was being escorted out on purpose. Liarte did not resist and calmly went to her room, but she could not help feeling that the Duke was trying to hide something. The next morning, the girl was sitting by the fountain with some sadness. A maid approached her and conveyed the master's request not to go out for a walk so late again. Hearing Mikael's voice, the girl immediately beamed. The guy approached and said that he had heard that she liked the garden. The girl confirmed and said that as soon as she found herself in such a big place, her mood immediately improved. The young man was delighted with her answer and, sitting down next to her, noticed a candy in the girl's hands and asked about it. The lady replied that Carmen had given it to her on yesterday's walk. The boy replied that his father must have taken the candy with him because he hoped to meet the lady. There was no one else in the palace who loved sweets so much. The girl didn't understand what Mikael meant, and the boy explained that his grandfather used to love sweets. Liarte realized for a moment that she hadn't met anyone else from Bircha. However, she knew that at this point Aaron Birch, the young man's grandfather, should still be alive, but he was never mentioned by the servant, and she had never seen him anywhere. The guy saw that the girl suddenly frowned and asked about it. The lady decided to confess to him that she had heard a strange howl yesterday. The young man was surprised, and the girl explained that it was a scream, like the howl of an animal, coming from a small house behind the main building. Mikael fell silent, absent-minded. After that, he stood up and told the girl to follow him, because if she was so interested in what was there, he wanted to show her. Marilyn immediately spoke up and said that this could not be done because it was dangerous there and the lady could get hurt. Mikael was grateful for her experience, but said her voice sounded as if she didn't trust him. The maid immediately apologized for her behavior. After that, the young man only helped the girl to her feet and assured the maid that she had nothing to worry about. In the evening, they came to the same door but stood indecisively before it for some time. The guy told her not to be afraid of anything. Opening the door, a dark fog came out of nowhere, and the guy told the lady to hide behind him in case of need. Together they walked on, but it was very cold inside, and she even got goosebumps. Mika lightly hugged her shoulders and told her not to be afraid, assuring her that he would be there for her. The girl smiled gratefully. Suddenly, she saw someone sitting in front of her. The lady was a little surprised that a person was being held in such a place. The boy was silent for a moment in embarrassment, and then he introduced the man to the lady. It was Aaron Birch, his grandfather. Liarte understood that he was the head of the family, but she didn't know what had happened to him. The boy explained that his grandfather had lost his mind, although a couple of years ago he had been fine. The boy didn't know what had happened to him and even wanted to kill him, but his father wouldn't let him do it and ordered him locked in a dungeon. Lady moved closer to the head, peering into its face. She saw red pupils and beastly fangs. Lady quickly realized that these were signs of madness. At the beginning of the First War, declared by the Birches, the Imperial family and the Elheims were confident of their victory, but as soon as the battle began, they were all defeated. During the war, everyone feared Michael above all else. He was even called the Devil's Messenger. When everyone was horrified by what was happening, the crown prince suggested using a strange pollen. Whoever inhaled it would go mad. However, the prince failed to use the dust on Mikhail, and then it turned out that the awakened one could remove the poison from the body. In the past life, the sole owner of that pollen was the hereditary prince. It was obvious to the girl that it was because of him that Aaron had succumbed to its effects. The head of Birsha shouted and sharply rushed at the girl, and the lady stepped back in fright and almost fell. But Mikhail managed to catch her. Other servants rushed to the dungeon and apologized for leaving their post, but they came running as soon as they heard the screams. The young man assured them that everything was fine. The servants immediately looked at the lady and asked who she was, but the boy stopped them and suggested that they introduce themselves first. The servants quickly followed the order and introduced themselves. One was called Hans, the other Andrel. Both were assistants to Mr. Aaron. The boys said that the leader was their benefactor and had saved them and Marilyn, and after what had happened to the master, they could not leave him. The lady looked at them more closely. The guy leaned over to her and asked if everything was okay, because she looked a little pale. The girl assured him that everything was fine, she was just a little scared. The lady understood that what had happened to the head had been done through a trusted person. Looking at the servants again, she thought that someone with him might be a spy. In the Imperial palace, the prince was disappointed with Liarte. If he had known, he would have turned her over to the Empire in advance. Now, the curse he had worked so hard to overcome was broken. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and a servant announced that the prince had come to pay a visit. Lucas was unhappy that someone had come without warning. The servant opened the door and quickly stepped aside, letting the guest pass. Carmen Birch came to the prince. The prince only laughed at the duke's visit. He knew that the elder Birch had lost his mind, and the younger one could barely see, even though he had received an awakening. The duke paid no attention to the prince's ridicule, because he understood that this was precisely what made him angry, but he had come to warn the prince not to send any more letters threatening to let the girl go. He warned that next time he would not leave it idle, and in confirmation of his words, grabbed a servant standing nearby and broke his arm. The duke warned that next time he would not be spared a fracture. The prince was furious that he had been threatened in this way. Carmen just smiled and said that he didn't dare threaten his majesty, but he wanted to ask a favor so that such letters wouldn't be sent again. At that, the man bowed. When Birch left, the prince was silent for a moment, and then turned to the wounded Count Fedes and said that he had to correct the duke's bad habit and ordered him to make Aaron crave his blood. Liarte kept wondering who could have put the saw in her head, but she understood that only someone the elder Birch trusted could have done it. Marilyn noticed that the girl was not herself after returning from that dungeon and asked if everything was okay. The lady smiled and replied that everything was fine. The maid said that if she could help in any way, she was always ready. The girl thought for a moment and then asked if she could meet the duke right away. Meanwhile, Carmen visited the dungeon where the head was being held. The man had come to finally put an end to everything, because he had been putting it off for so long. However, looking into the old man's crazy eyes, he remembered the kind smile the leader had previously rewarded everyone with. The duke lowered his weapon and realized that he would not be able to do it again. When Carmen heard someone's footsteps, she told her father that the execution would have to be postponed again because a guest had come to visit him today. Liarte stopped for a moment. The girl greeted me and immediately said that she knew she wasn't allowed here, but she had something to say, so she broke the rule. The duke smiled, understanding that Marilyn was trying to stop the girl, and emphasized that when he was in the dungeon, no one was allowed to enter. The lady apologized again, but looking at the weapon in the duke's hand, she said she was glad she had come in time. She approached Carmen and assured her that Aaron's madness could be cured. The duke was shocked by what he heard and did not believe that such a thing was really possible. The lady only clarified whether the man trusted her. With a heavy breath, he confirmed, and Liarte was grateful for it. The girl approached the head, and he angrily tried to rush at her. The duke warned the lady not to come so close, as it was dangerous. Liarte assured her that everything was fine. A ball of water began to appear in front of her, which became larger and larger. The girl assured her that there was nothing dangerous here. The girl moved a little closer so that the streams of water could freely cover her head, and waited for the magic to slowly begin to take effect. In Birch's past life, they learned too late that poison could be removed from the body thanks to the powerful magic of the awakened one. In a moment, the magic of the water took effect and Aaron stopped breaking free from his bonds and seemed to fall asleep. The lady said that the energy of the water would soon make his head feel better. Carmen had been stunnedly silent all this time, because he didn't believe that madness could be cured. The Duke asked the lady to explain what had happened to the head. The girl said that it was like being poisoned by black pollen. Ordinary people died from it, and those who woke up became beasts. Liarte continued and said that the water awakened could neutralize the poison and promised to do her best. The Duke asked if the chapter could really be saved, and she confirmed. However, the girl asked to keep it a secret. The Duke chuckled and said that the lady was very insightful, but he also thought that Andrel or Hans could have been involved in the poisoning. The lady said that it would be difficult to find the culprit for now, because if the spy found out about everything, it would only become more difficult. The Duke agreed, so he promised to keep everything a secret. Carmen entrusted the girl with the treatment of her head, but said that he could not always be present himself, so he would assign a guard to the girl, because he was worried about leaving her alone. The next day, the lady came back to continue her treatment, and Mikael was already waiting for her in the dungeon. The girl was happy to see him. They approached the head, and there was a moment of silence. Liarte then said to the young man to move a little further away, but the boy wanted to object. The lady assured her that everything would be fine, then slowly approached the head. She wasn't sure about her idea yet, but she decided to try it. Leaning down, she handed Aaron a candy, and for a moment he stopped fighting furiously. The head immediately ate the sweet and immediately calmed down, which allowed the girl to continue casting magic. Mikael was amazed by the lady's ingenuity. The guy asked her how she came up with that idea, and she replied that madness couldn't completely change a person, so she thought that the taste buds hadn't changed. The girl said that while the boss was eating the candy, he was calm, and during this time she could continue the treatment without any problems. The lady turned to Aaron and asked him to be patient for a moment. The guy watched as the lady concentrated on her work, but distracted her for a moment because he wanted to say that she had already helped them so much and asked why she needed it. Liarte replied that the chapter was very valuable to Mikael's family, so she just wanted to help them. When the girl finished, she turned to the boy and said that she was finished for today, but it would take at least a week to completely remove the poison. She turned her head slightly to the head and said that by then she would like to try to find the spy. Walking in the garden, the girl wondered how exactly they could poison the late Duke. There were many ways to do this, especially if no one knew. She thought for a moment and thought that she could probably find some clues in the chapter room, but she had to find a way to get there first. The lady spoke her last words aloud, and Mikael responded. The girl immediately turned and asked how he had come here. The young man replied that he had seen her from the tower, so he decided to come. The guy asked if she had been walking around a bit. The girl confirmed it and said that she needed to think and get to one place. He asked where exactly she needed to go, and the girl, confused, replied that she wanted to find evidence of poisoning in the head's room, so she asked if she could go in there. The guy leaned over and agreed without question. The young man said that there was no room in this palace, that she was not allowed to enter. The lady smiled and thanked him. A few minutes later, Mikael led the girl to his grandfather's former chambers. He opened the door and let her in first. The guy said that about a year ago, Grandpa had been sick. The lady noticed that the room hadn't been used for a long time, but it was still clean. Liarte asked if anything had changed here in that time, and the boy confirmed it. The lady continued to look around and noticed ancient books on the shelves that were forbidden to read in Elheim. She asked if she could take one of the books because she had long wanted to read it. The guy didn't forbid it, but he laughed when he noticed that the girl couldn't reach the book. When he approached to help get the book, the lady turned to him and was silent for a moment, just staring at his face. Mikael noticed that the girl had fallen silent and wondered what was wrong with her face, because it had suddenly turned red, and he wondered if it was because of him. Liarte didn't answer, just moved a little closer and silently hugged him. The guy didn't want to step aside, but he asked what was wrong with the lady. The girl stepped back a little and explained that she did it because she liked him. Lady thought it looked strange, but Mikael didn't think so for a moment. In fact, he said that if he did anything again, it would be better if it was a kiss, and leaned in to kiss her. However, the young man did not have time to kiss her, because Andrel entered the room unnoticed, but upon noticing the couple, he quickly ran out of the room. Birch was dissatisfied. Liarte suddenly wondered why this particular servant had entered the room. The boy explained that these rooms were cleaned in turn by Marilyn, Hans, and Andrel. The girl thought for a moment, and after a moment, Her gaze fell on a glass jar full of candies, and she asked what it was. The young man replied that it was grandfather's favorite candies. The boy continued and said that if his father hadn't tried to forbid the chief from eating these candies, he wouldn't have listened. The girl carefully examined the sweets. The lady opened the glass jar and took out one of the sweets. The girl now understood that because the late Duke loved sweets so much, he ate them every day. That way, no one would suspect that the sweets were poisoned by black pollen. A moment later, the girl turned to Mikael and said that she needed to meet with Aaron again. They were again in front of the dungeon gate, but this time the girl wanted to go alone. The boy wanted to object, but she only said that she wanted to check something. The lady asked her to confide in her. The young man did not persist any longer, and smiling, assured her that he trusted her. The girl approached the door and immediately called out to Andrella. The servant immediately came out and asked why the lady had come. Liarte said that she wanted to ask him something. The lady clarified Mikael's words that he and 2 other servants took turns cleaning the head's chambers. The servant confirmed this, and the girl immediately showed him the candy, asking if they knew about them. The girl entered the dungeon, blaming herself for her carelessness, because all the answers lay on the surface. The Birches declared war on Elheim and the Imperial family before her rebirth. Then Duke Carmen personally killed his father, because he thought it was the only way to get rid of the curse. When the Duke learned that the blame for the curse lay with the Imperial family, he declared war. At that time, rumors began to spread about the famous murderers. About Marilyn with frightening eyes, about Andrell with cat's vision, but among all these rumors, the name of Hans was not mentioned in any way. The servant noticed her and asked why the lady had given birth here at such a late hour. The girl replied that she'd come to visit Aaron and asked if the illness was still progressing. The servant replied that there had been no improvement so far and wanted to scold his colleague for letting the lady in alone. Liarte noticed that the 2 were close, and the boy confirmed it. Then she asked if he was the one who always checked the chief's food. The servant replied that Andrell did that, and asked if there were any problems. The lady replied that the problem was not the food. She said that the problem was precisely the sweets, and showing one, said that this sweet had been in the chambers of the previous duke. Hans diligently looked away and replied that it was the first time he had seen it. However, the lady did not believe him, and said that it was he who brought these sweets to the Duchy of Bershi to poison the head. Now the servant had no reason to object. When the girl showed this candy to Andre, he immediately recognized them and said that he had bought Hans's candy and remembered that black candies were very rare. The lady also made it clear that when the headman felt unwell, the servant personally fed him black candies. He was clearly worried that the curse might be lifted. The lady said that the large number of these sweets in his room proved everything. The servant said nothing more, only turned around and took something out of his pocket. The girl was afraid that they wanted to give it to the chief. Liarte was about to rush at the intruder, but Mikael was ahead of her and quickly immobilized the spy. The guy apologized for not holding back his words, but assured her that he only wanted to save her when he felt that she was in danger. The Duke also followed his son into the dungeon and confirmed the young man's words that if someone they valued was in danger, they would come to his aid. The lady didn't expect to see Carmen here either, to which the man explained that he had heard her and her son's conversation. So he followed them because he was worried that something might go wrong. Hearing that the Duke cared about her made her feel good. In the Duchy of Bershi, she began to feel something that she could not get in Elheim. She sincerely thanked him for it. Now the Duke approached the traitor and took him by the hair. Mikael took some kind of jar from the spy. He was told that it was poison, but the young man knew that it was not for Bershi, because his family was resistant to most poisons. The boy looked more closely and realized it was someone's blood. The girl replied that unusual methods could be used when working with black pollen. However, she asked to postpone it until she had cured the head. The young man was surprised at this, and she replied that there was one good method for this. Liarte directed her water magic at Aaron and said that perhaps she could cure the head today. The girl's magic completely enveloped her head and lifted it above the ground. The Duke couldn't believe what he saw, but the lady reassured him that everything was fine, because that was how she could cure Aaron. Only a strong, awakened person could get rid of the poison. The water power had to penetrate deep into the body to reach the black pollen, so it wanted to release all its power into the head. The water completely covered the man, and he even started to suffocate, and the girl shouted for the boss to suffer a little longer and promised that she would cure him. The head stopped dangling in the dome and seemed to have lost consciousness, but the girl still didn't let go of him. It took a few more minutes for the magic to work, and finally Liarte released Aaron from the dome of water. Everyone became worried when they saw the man standing up and started calling out to him. Mikael tried to call out to his grandfather, and the lady asked how he was. In a moment, the head opened his eyes completely and began to look around, worried that he had gone mad. His relatives immediately rushed to him. Aaron rubbed his eyes and immediately looked at the stranger, asking who she was. The girl didn't have time to answer because the head said he felt the water power, so he assumed she was from Elheim. Carmen approached and wanted to introduce the girl, but before he could say a word, the headman immediately shouted that the child should be thrown out of here immediately. The chief did not want to see any of the Elheims, because they were responsible for his wife's death. The lady was shocked, but she said nothing. Mikael wanted to intercede for her. Then the chief said that in that case he would go himself, to which the Duke wanted to stop him, but the girl herself spoke up and said that Aaron was right, because she was not a member of their family, so she should go. Father and son were stunned by her words, and the Duke said he would not let her leave them, but the girl said she would not destroy the family that had just been reunited. After saying that, the girl immediately turned around and walked out. The young man wanted to rush after her, but his grandfather stopped him. The boy was very disappointed by his grandfather's behavior because he didn't understand how he could act like that when the girl had saved them all. The head was amazed that the child had healed him with her power. Despite his vague memories, Aaron remembered the face of the lady who had shouted at the top of her lungs that she would definitely save him. Now he himself stood disappointed, for he understood that he had made a considerable mistake. Meanwhile, Liart slowly walked towards the exit. The girl could barely move her feet, and she didn't want to believe that everything would end like this. However, she understood that the head's hatred for her was normal, because the Birches and the Elheims had always been at enmity, and during Aaron's time, this enmity was even stronger. She knew there was nothing she could do about it, but looking at the overcast sky, she knew she didn't want to leave this place. Rain began to fall from the sky, but the girl didn't even try to hide. She understood that in essence she shouldn't even exist. Mikael called out from behind her, and the girl turned at his voice. Liart immediately apologized for causing him trouble and didn't want to do it again. The guy didn't care. He just hugged her tightly and asked her not to leave him. She was not only his savior, he promised to protect her all his life, because without her, it had no meaning. As he let her go, he said that no matter what Grandpa said, she still had the right to stay here. Suddenly, the chief and the Duke also ran up to them. Aaron shouted to stop the girl. Liarte was a little surprised that he had come. The girl immediately turned her head away and, apologizing, said that she would leave the area immediately. However, the chief quickly stopped her and apologized for his behavior. He explained that he didn't immediately understand who had saved him, so he didn't want the lady to take his words to heart. He also thanked the girl for saving not only him, but also his grandson. Liart was shocked by what she heard. After this, Aaron still asked that she not leave the duchy so that they could fully repay her kindness. The head's words that she could stay here shocked the girl even more, and she couldn't believe that she was really allowed to stay here. The man smiled and confirmed, and if the girl wanted, she could stay here forever. She wanted to say that she was very glad about it, but she couldn't say a word because her body suddenly felt heavy and her head was spinning. The lady began to fall. The last thing she saw was Mikael rushing towards her, but if he hadn't called out, her girlfriend wouldn't have gotten up again. The next day the rain stopped, but Liarte was still unconscious. Everyone gathered in her room around the bed, and the doctor assured her that nothing was in danger now. The doctor also reported that the lady fainted due to excessive use of her powers, and she also seemed to have suffered severe psychological stress. Aleph entered the chambers and announced that a letter had arrived from the palace. He said that they had somehow learned that Aaron had regained consciousness. However, the palace's reaction to this was expected, considering that their assassination attempt had failed. Bircha was also informed that the downpour did not stop even in the capital, and apparently this was because the lady had used up all her strength. After a moment, the girl slowly opened her eyes. Mikael immediately rushed to her and she asked what happened. The young man told her that she had suddenly fainted, but that for now it was better for her to lie down and gain strength. The Duke also asked how she was feeling. The girl assured that everything was fine with her now and thanked them for their concern for her. The guide told the lady that everyone was worried about her. Hearing this, the girl looked to the side and saw Aaron next to her, who was looking at her in shock. The Duke said that if the girl was uncomfortable seeing the headman here, they could send him away, but Liart didn't want that at all. However, the man still felt guilty, so when he asked how she was feeling, he immediately said that if she was uncomfortable in his presence, he wouldn't come anymore. But the lady did not hold any grudge against him at all, and replied that the chief had not regained consciousness for a long time, so she asked how he was doing. The man was impressed by her concern. Her words brought tears to his eyes. He just smiled and said that everything was fine with him. Meanwhile, in the Imperial palace, everyone was on edge at the sudden arrival of the Empress. The woman, without looking, dismissed all the servants. She immediately headed to the room where her son was now. Lucas was no less surprised by his mother's visit and asked why she had come. However, Terencia thought it was a stupid question, because there was a lot of gossip going around right now that Aaron was back on his feet. She looked angrily at her son and asked why the head of Birch was still alive, and the prince could not do anything right. Franz said it wasn't his fault. It was all because of that Elheim girl. His plan was perfect. Finally, the Empress asked if her son had any other plans regarding this. The prince confirmed and assured that he had ideas on how to definitively destroy Bircha. At this point, the Empress decided to trust her son, but emphasized that this was her last chance. She made it clear that her son should not disappoint her again. When Lucas was left alone, he was sure that this time everything would work out, and not even the Pope's daughter would be able to interfere. The prince turned to Fedez and asked if Hans had completed all the tasks. The count replied that the murder had failed, but he had received a letter stating that another task had been completed. Franz was pleased with the result he heard, and didn't even notice that the head of Bircha was no longer under their control, but he still knew that the enemies didn't have long left. Meanwhile, the sun was already shining brightly in the county, and the head and his son sat silently at the table, waiting for the other guests. A moment later, Liarta joined them, accompanied by Mikhail. The Duke and his chief immediately stood up in shock. Carmen asked how the girl was feeling, and she replied that everything was fine now, but she noticed that Aaron still felt uncomfortable because of the events of last time. The girl wanted to show that she didn't hold any grudges over the past, so she went up to the boss herself and asked if he was feeling well after his illness. The man said that he felt unusually light. The Duke raised his voice and said that it was all thanks to her and called the lady Lily. The girl was surprised and asked what that meant. The Duke explained that it was in the language of the small kingdom where his mother was from, and that the name meant everything beautiful, dear, and noble to the heart. Mikhail said that if his father liked someone, he would call them by the affectionate name of Lily. Sitting down at the table, the girl thought that she really liked such a gentle name. She felt a slight thrill for the first time, and decided that this was exactly what happiness looked like. Liarte took the cup and noticed that it was very beautiful. The Duke thought that the lady needed her own cup, so he said he had ordered one especially for her. The lady was pleasantly surprised that the Duke had even bothered about this, so she modestly thanked him for the name and the cup because she believed that a lot had been done for her. Mikhail assured her that it wasn't that much, because she should have been enjoying these things for a long time. The girl thanked him. The Duke also assured her that they simply wanted to give her something she didn't have before. He asked what else the lady would like and said she could ask for anything. The girl thought about what else she would like and immediately realized that she wanted to remember this moment forever, but she wanted to do it her own way. Liarte immediately said that she would like to paint a picture. The Duke immediately picked up on her idea and replied that it could be a good hobby. The girl was glad that everyone liked her idea, and Mikhail said that he would like to see how she draws and what the picture would look like. Suddenly, Lily asked where Marilyn was now, as she hadn't seen her all day. The young man replied that the maid had some business in the dungeon, namely, interrogating Hans. The Duke replied that during the investigation, the servant had confessed that he was a spy for the Crown Prince, but a couple of days ago he had been walking around the estate and doing something. He said that if Marilyn and Andrel hadn't tortured him so much, the spy still wouldn't have confessed. Hearing about the wanderings around the estate, the girl became wary. She understood that it couldn't be left like that, and tried to remember what happened during this period in her past life. The girl was trying hard to remember what exactly could have happened after the death and funeral of the head, and suddenly a candle caught her eye. Now she remembered. Before the Birches declared war, their estate had been engulfed in fire. The fire had taken half the servants, and she had seen a photo of the destroyed house in the newspaper. Lady was certain that it was Hans's doing. Mikhail distracted her by noticing that Liarte looked worried and assumed that she wanted to investigate the matter. The boy said that he would like to see the estate and the places where the spy was, so they could take a walk together. The Duke happily embraced this idea. However, the chief was somewhat embarrassed by the idea of a walk, especially at such a dangerous time, and his grandson assumed that Aaron also wanted to take a walk with Lily. The head was silent for a moment and then confirmed his grandson's words. The boy was glad to hear this. Then the young man turned to the girl and said that she had not yet fully recovered, so it would be better to postpone the walk until tomorrow. The lady did not object. Taking another sip, the girl thought that if she could cure her head's madness, then this time she would be able to help in some way, and she promised herself that she would definitely protect the people dear to her. Evening, Elheim Manor. Ain came to his father's office and wanted to tell him something. The eldest son reported that when it rained incessantly throughout the empire, he felt as if his water magic was disappearing. Vyman was next to him at the time, and he noticed that it had some effect on the younger one as well. The boy asked if his father felt something similar. The man confirmed it, and the son asked if it had anything to do with Liarte leaving them. The Duke couldn't deny it. He also worried that if their power completely disappeared, he wouldn't know what to do. Leon didn't stop staring aimlessly out the window at this time. As she got herself together the next day, the girl noticed that she had woken up late again and couldn't shake the thought that she had slept like a baby in this duchy. Marilyn decided to ask the lady about today's walk. The girl confirmed it, but said that it was more like reconnaissance than a walk. Pokavika was happy to say that she had never seen the gentlemen go out together before. They had always respected each other, but the atmosphere in the house was uncomfortable, and after the lady's arrival, everything changed. The maid also said that, by order of the Duke, she had prepared everything necessary for the lady's painting, and if she needed anything else, she should let her know. The lady thanked her, and the maid asked what exactly the lady wanted to draw. The girl remembered Mikhail's eyes, but modestly replied that it was a secret for now. The maid didn't ask any questions and just said she was looking forward to the result. The girl assured her that she would try to finish the painting as soon as possible. Lily decided to change the subject for now and asked about Hans's interrogations. Marilyn replied that they had managed to find out what kind of liquid the spy had brought. It turned out to be human blood. The maid said that judging by the structure, it was the blood of the crown prince. The maid also confessed that she had tried to combine the blood with black pollen, and the result was an explosion. The lady was stunned. At this, Liart suggested that they wanted to kill the chief by giving him the prince's blood. The maid confirmed and quickly thanked the lady for saving Aaron. To this, the girl only replied that she had done what she had to. The maid was pleasantly surprised by her words. Milady also decided to clarify whether they had been able to find out anything else from Hans. The maid thought for a moment and remembered Andrel's words. According to him, the spy said nothing more, but kept repeating about tonight's midnight. Lily was shocked by what she heard. She had not expected that there would be a fire today. Michael entered the room and said he had come to take the girl for a walk. Marilyn hurried to leave the room. The guy complimented the girl, but noticed that she didn't answer anything and was sitting with her head bowed. He immediately rushed to her, asking what was the matter. The girl wanted to say something, but stopped herself because she didn't know if he would believe her words. As proof, she only had the words of her past life, but she didn't know if she could use them. The guy approached her and assured her that he was always on her side and believed her. He said he was ready to help her at any time. Kissing her hand, he asked the girl to tell him everything. Lily realized again that this place was completely different from the Duchy of Elheim, because here were people she had to protect and who were on her side. Exhaling and gathering her strength, the lady asked him to listen, even if it sounded strange. Finally, she said that at midnight tonight, Birch Manor would be engulfed in flames. After her confession, the boy thought it must be Hans's doing. The girl confirmed it and said that a spy must have been roaming the estate to prepare everything for this. Lily said that was why she wanted to inspect the estate in person. At this, the young man stood up and said that he would immediately inform his father and grandfather about everything, and they would all inspect the territory together. The lady still couldn't believe that Mikhail believed her. The young man assured her that he had promised. The girl was pleased to feel this and said that she was glad to meet him. With that, they all walked together along the forest path. The Duke asked if the lady had guessed how Hans wanted to start the fire. The girl assumed that ancient magic would be used and said that the Crown Prince had already used it to attack Barsh before, so there was a chance that he would use it again. However, right now the girl couldn't know exactly how everything would turn out. Judging by the chains in Mikhail's eyes, there must be an intermediary to activate the curse, and he must have been hidden somewhere. Finally, they came to the lake, and the headman said that the spy had visited many places on the estate, but it was near the water that he visited most often, and judging by the data, he could have hidden something there. Liarte went ahead because she wanted to check everything first. The Duke and the leader immediately wanted to stop her because it could be dangerous there. The lady immediately turned to them, not understanding what they meant. She herself was standing on the surface of the water. Bersha was extremely surprised by the lady's ability, and the headman thought that all Elheims could do this, but the Duke suggested that only Lily could stand on water. The girl walked away and told the men that she would look around a little to see what might be at the bottom of the lake and then return. Having gone a little further, the girl began to examine every meter of the lake bottom. She thought that something could be hidden at the bottom and not near the shore. Liarte took a couple of steps forward and noticed that at a certain point her leg was starting to give way. The girl decided to take a closer look, because she was sure that something was hidden in this particular place, and she was not mistaken, because at the bottom she clearly saw a pebble that was very different from the others. The lady noticed that the stone had ancient symbols engraved on it. She bent down to retrieve the stone from the water, and at that moment the birches were afraid for her, but she eventually managed to retrieve the stone. Returning to the shore, she showed everyone the stone with ancient signs, and was sure that Hans had thrown it there, saying that it was an intermediary for the spell. The Duke was very unhappy about all this, because these curses on his family had gone too far. The girl assumed that such signs were scattered throughout the estate. Looking back, she said that time was almost up. The sun was beginning to set. The lady recalled that according to the spy, the fire was supposed to happen at midnight, so she turned to the Duke and asked him to evacuate everyone from the estate. Michael approached and asked the lady if he should have ordered the knights to start looking for intermediaries, but the lady replied that there could be fakes there, so she would find them faster herself. Lily took the young man by the hand and asked him to take her to all the places Hans had been. The boy smiled and said that in that case, he would carry her in his arms. The girl was a little surprised, and he explained that there were many narrow places in their territory, and it would take a long time to get around them. Taking her in their arms, they would get there faster. At this, the lady stopped asking any more questions and quickly agreed, hugging Mikael. The guy blushed and quickly picked up the lady in his arms. She turned to the chief and the Duke and said that she would find intermediaries as soon as possible. The men advised her to be careful. She smiled and assured them that everything would be fine. They believed her words, so the lady promised not to let them down. As quickly as possible, Mikael took her to the estate, and the girl stopped him in front of the entrance. She said that this was where she should look around. One by one they searched for and destroyed all the stones. Mikael crushed another one and announced wearily that it was the 8th. At this, the girl announced that there were 3 more places left. The young man quickly picked her up and told her that they should hurry because it would be dark soon. The girl herself understood that there was little time left, but she hoped to have time to destroy the other intermediaries to prevent the fire, but looking back, she noticed a bright light. Lily called out to the boy, and when he turned around, he noticed that they still hadn't had time to complete their mission, because explosions were already heard in the palace and flames were spreading. She was very scared, because she realized that they had missed another place. Mikael quickly calmed the girl and said that the Duke had already evacuated everyone, so this fire would not harm anyone. She wanted to say something more after that, but she didn't have time to say a word because there was another explosion ahead of them. The girl and the boy immediately returned there. This time, even the boy didn't expect something to explode there, because that was where the center of Birch's death force was located. The girl wondered what would happen if the power was released. The young man said depressingly that it would not affect the direct descendants of Bircha, but ordinary people would die. The lady was shocked by what she heard. The guy said that because of this, no one came close to this place, and it was obvious that the explosion was set to destroy all the inhabitants of the estate. He understood that if the fire spread, it would be difficult to stop and would put ordinary people's lives at risk. The young man told Lily to stay here. The girl knew that in her past life there was only a fire, so she assumed that the future had changed because of it. Valto ran up to them and informed them that the power of death had begun to spread, so the lady needed to leave immediately. The lady was shocked that only she was wanted to be saved. The knight confirmed and said that the chief and the Duke would be safe, but she might not be able to withstand this force. He also said that the Birches were capable of moving people over considerable distances and had enough power to deport her away. She asked about the night. She also stressed the other servants and Marilyn and couldn't let herself be saved and leave the rest behind. The knight smiled and assured her that the others would be saved as well, but Liart understood that these words were lies because the forest would burn down faster than everyone could be evacuated. At this, she broke free and said that she would put out the fire herself. Valto tried to stop her, saying that the fire had reached considerable size and it would be difficult for her to put out the entire area. Mikael also wanted to stop her, saying that it would be difficult to extinguish the fire caused by ancient magic. The girl could suffer, but Lily could not allow people to die. Without turning to him, she concentrated and raised her hand, promising to protect Bircha. The lady understood that the reason the stones were hidden in the water was to use them as an ancient magical offering. In other words, it was impossible to put out the fire from the mansion, so she had to personally cause a downpour. Rain slowly began to fall from the sky. The boy stood there, unable to even move. He promised to protect Liarte and even thought he had saved her. However, he quickly realized that from their first meeting to this day, the only one who was constantly being saved was himself. Meanwhile, Ain knocked on his brother's room and went in to talk, but Leon paid no attention to anything. The elder was worried that the younger had not left his room since his sister left. However, the young man still couldn't believe that they had lost the true heiress and were left with a fake, but among all the Elheims, the younger brother still remained the strongest. The guy suggested that his brother send a letter to Birch again and was sure that this time they would respond. Ain looked out the window and noticed that it had suddenly started raining again, and like last time, he suddenly felt his strength begin to fade. The boy began to writhe as if in pain, but the younger one paid no attention to what was happening. Finally, Leon spoke, confirming his brother's guesses that if their power completely disappeared, there would be no awakened left in Elheim. A few days after the fire, the girl was walking in the garden and never took her eyes off the house she had managed to protect. However, she suddenly realized that even when she caused that downpour, she didn't feel any fatigue. On the contrary, it seemed like the water's power had increased. It felt like she was finally able to regain what she had lost long ago, and suddenly thought that in this way she could take the power from all the Elheims. Suddenly, something made a sound near her foot. Looking around, she noticed a fox who approached her without any fear. The girl was surprised to see a silver fox here. She slowly reached out her hand to the animal and it immediately responded to the touch. Liarte thought that the animal was lost, and taking the fox in her arms, wanted to carry it into the forest. But Mikael's voice came from behind and said that the fox had always been here. The girl thought that the chanterelle grew on the Bircha estate, but the young man replied that he did not immediately because he had first taken it from the Elheim forest. The lady was surprised. The guy continued and said that he had found a fox at a hunting competition, but he didn't want to show the animal to the lady because he thought it would bring up bad memories for her. The young gentleman also noticed that the fox was not very trainable. The lady was surprised that the fox needed training. The young man said that the animal was quite hot-tempered, but in the lady's hands it was calm. The girl hugged the fox closer to her and it kissed Liarte. The guy noticed that the animal had taken a liking to the lady. The boy also asked how the lady was doing and said that the Duke and the chief would quarrel if they found out that the lady had not rested. Lily assured him that she was fine. A moment later, the young man approached her and, lightly touching her cheek, asked if she knew that he was the one who worried about her the most. He didn't want her to put herself in danger again, even though he understood that if it happened again, she would rush to protect them without hesitation, but he wanted to do it together. The guy just wanted to remind her that he would protect her for any reason, no matter how dangerous it would be. She was shocked by what she heard, but smiled and thanked her. She felt pleased at the thought that Mikael had not scolded her, but had instead said that he would always be there for her. These words made her feel pleased. Their conversation was interrupted by Aleph. The man came to inform them that the Duke had summoned them to his place to discuss something. In the evening, they came to the Duke's house, and he immediately inquired about the lady's well-being. The girl replied that she was fine. Mikael asked why his father had called them. Carmen said that he wanted to discuss with them the repayment of the palace debt. The girl assumed that it concerned the Imperial court. The Duke confirmed and with a sly smile said that he was thinking about repaying the debt to the Imperial palace. The lady asked if the Duke wanted to set fire to it. He confirmed it and said that the palace was full of their spies, so it would be easy. He wanted to corner the Imperial family. Lily understood that the palace's concessions were terrible, so she supported the Duke in avenging Birch, but asked him not to harm innocent people. Carmen didn't object. The lady also wanted to say something about the last downpour she had caused, because after it she felt an unprecedented surge of strength. Liarti assumed that at that moment she had taken the power from the Elheims. The Duke and Mikael were surprised for a moment, but this news made them quite happy. The Duke even thought with malice that the Imperial family would not be happy about this news. The girl wondered what the reaction might be. Carmen said that they would not remain inactive, because when the awakened leave the country, the authorities find themselves at a disadvantage, which is why the Imperial family has been threatening the Elheims for a long time. The others were happy to take advantage of this, but if the Empire loses the water awakened, it will most likely seek revenge. The Duke said that the last attack on Bersha was an attempt to contain the force, and if the Elheims couldn't help, who knew what would happen to them, but he didn't want to worry about that. The man made it clear that he now only wanted to watch as the two allies would now destroy each other. The prince greeted the morning with a broad smile, for he was certain that the Duchy of Bersh was now in ashes. He was pleased that he had been able to do what had not been done before him. Count Fades suddenly burst into the chambers. The prince expected that someone had come to tell him good news and indicated that he was not feeling very well today, as he had used a lot of ancient magic. However, the count came to report that Bercha had quickly extinguished the fire. The prince was furious, as he did not believe that such a fire could be easily extinguished. The count himself was sure that such a fire would be difficult to put out, but he reported that it had suddenly started to rain. Lucas could not believe what he was hearing. The prince was even more furious when he heard this, and immediately realized that it could have been the work of that girl from Elheim. She had once again disrupted his plans. Franz was overcome with anger and promised himself that he would definitely capture this girl, even if it meant giving her the title of princess. Getting up from bed, the prince ordered the count to start learning more about the lady, especially what she liked and didn't like, but he didn't have time to finish because an explosion was heard behind him. The prince quickly realized that this was Birch's revenge, but he didn't have time to do anything because a maidservant came to him and said that His Majesty had immediately summoned him to his presence. In a moment, the boy was in front of his father's throne, as ordered. The emperor immediately said that he had heard the news that a fire had broken out in his son's palace, but not an ordinary one, and if it was not put out, the fire would engulf the entire palace. The prince didn't know how to respond to this, but the emperor didn't even give him a chance to say anything, and immediately clarified whether it was revenge on Bercha. The emperor reiterated that he had ordered his son not to do anything that would anger them. Lucas was furious that it had happened this way, as the enemies were already on fire. The prince knew that without them the threat to the imperial family would disappear, but he did not understand why his father constantly ordered him not to touch them. The emperor said that he had sent for the Elheims and that they should be here soon, and told his son to be polite to them, because this time he would not forgive mistakes. The prince agreed without a word, and thought that thanks to the water awakened, this situation could be resolved, and then he would think about how to bring the duke's daughter here. A servant entered the room and announced that the Elheims had arrived. The emperor stood up and gave the order for them to help put out the fire. However, the servant could not utter one problem. Finally, the emperor was informed that the Elheims were not going to accept anything in extinguishing the fire. The prince and the emperor were shocked. The duke sat in the carriage and watched as the crown prince's palace was engulfed in flames, but he could do nothing because the water power had disappeared. The awakened low-class Elheims had become ordinary people again. The direct heirs still had some strength left, but it wasn't enough. The duke understood that if they used their power again, they would once again become ordinary unawakened, whom they themselves hated. Nevertheless, the duke did not know what to do when the emperor gave the order to extinguish the fire. The coachman announced that the carriage had arrived as scheduled. The eldest son said it was time for them to get out, but the duke refused and said that they would never get out of the carriage. He told the children that they had come to the palace on the emperor's orders, but that now they would not interfere in the relations between the imperial family and Birch. At this, Ain asked what they would give birth to in that case. The duke repeated that they would not get out of the carriage and would not use force in any way. Vaiaman wanted to object. After all, the order had been given, but the duke shouted at his son, telling him that if they used force, they would lose it forever. The duke asked about Thandarayan, but the elder said that no one had seen him since the fire started. The man was furious that his son had disappeared somewhere in such a situation. There was a knock on the carriage and everyone turned their heads. The duke tried again to say that they would not get out of the carriage. However, they were immediately informed that it was His Majesty's Knights of the Order, so they had to open the door. The Emperor himself was in front of the carriage. The Emperor had arrived because he had heard of the Elheim's reluctance to intervene in the confrontation with Birsha, but His Majesty also sensed that the Duke was not simply unwilling to put out the fire. He suspected that the awakened simply could not do it. The Duke was deeply affected by these words, and he realized that hiding would no longer work. The Emperor gave the order to demonstrate his power to them. The Duke was stunned and understood that His Majesty was not a fool and immediately guessed everything. The Emperor repeated the order more menacingly. The Duke could not disobey the order. Coming out of the carriage, he asked how exactly to demonstrate his power to them. The Emperor pointed to a place not connected with the prince's palace and ordered the fire to be extinguished there. The Duke turned to Viamin. The young man was shaking with fear, but the father ignored this and ordered his son to use force to put out the fire. The boy approached and, concentrating, began to summon power. A small ball of water formed in his hands. The water covered the fire a little, but that was it. Lian silently looked at his older brother and quickly realized that from now on he was unawakened. The Duke turned to the Emperor to ask if this was now enough for demonstration. His Majesty replied that he had seen enough, but said that the rest had not shown strength and said that now it was the Duke's turn. The man was shocked by what he heard. The Emperor clarified that he did not need to put out the fire, but if he showed his strength, all suspicions would be removed from him. The Duke understood that the Emperor had wanted to make sure they didn't lose power from the start. The Elheims had not ruled the kingdom because of their political skills or their war-fighting skills. There was always a reason for everything in their water magic. If they lost their power, the Duke had no idea how great the Emperor's wrath would be. Just as the Duke was about to begin his demonstration, the sky suddenly turned dark and a strong wind blew. Everyone immediately raised their heads. A moment later, a mark with ancient symbols appeared in the sky, and no one knew the reason for its appearance. A few minutes before a major fire broke out in the prince's palace, everyone was trying to escape from the fire, which could not be extinguished with water. Someone wrapped in a cloak did not even try to escape. While chaos reigned in the palace, he penetrated the secret dungeon, which the prince had previously visited, and repeated the entire journey. Finally, Thandarian found the spirit. Taking off his hood, he noticed that this time something was wrong. Looking closer, he noticed that the spirit's eyes were open. He turned to her, saying that it was clear that she had finally woken up. The boy asked who she was. The spirit was silent at first, and then replied that she was the past. The young man smiled at his find, and after a moment asked if she could turn back time. The spirit confirmed, but said that for this, she needed a lot of strength. She also felt the water power and assumed that in front of her was awakened. The guy confirmed. With a sinister smile, she also said that she was a fake. The guy blushed a little. Although she didn't look like the Spirit King, she also looked frightening. Thandarian assumed she meant Lian and asked why she needed him. The spirit at first didn't want to talk, but the young man forced her, and she confessed that she wanted her half back. She confessed that she would then become a full-fledged queen of spirits. The boy realized that if she really succeeded, then she would be able to turn back the time when Liarte left them. At this, the guy agreed to bring her a fake, but on the condition that she now proved that she was really a spirit of the past. The boy said that he would believe her as soon as she turned back time to the moment when the fire started. The spirit replied that in that case she would fall asleep again for several months. To which the young man asked if it wasn't worth it for him to bring her a fake. The spirit was silent for a moment and then accepted the deal. When she applied force outwards, a loud sound was heard. After that, the spirit told the boy that she would wait for the fake and fell asleep. On the street, after the mark disappeared, the sun shone brightly again, but there was no trace of the mark. No one understood what had just happened, and one of the Emperor's knights reported that the fire had completely disappeared. The Duke became alarmed. The Emperor was pleased that the fire had been extinguished, but he expressed regret that he had never been able to see the Elheim forces. However, he said that he hoped to see it next time. Turning his horse, he said to the Duke that he could not avoid it. The Duke sensed the threatening notes in the Emperor's tone, and understood that His Majesty knew the plight of the water awakened. Returning to the duchy, Ain breathed a sigh of relief, because this time they managed to avoid collapse. The eldest son also understood that the Emperor wanted to test whether they still had strength and said that next time they would not be able to avoid it. The Duke said that they must return Liarte immediately. The boy said that they had already sent many letters to Birch, but there was no answer. The Duke became angry and shouted at his son, saying that in this case it was necessary to take by force. The young man did not expect such a reaction from his father. Their family had always been friendly, but now there was only enmity between them. Thandarian suddenly came up from behind, surprised that the family was already in a hurry to leave. Ain asked his brother where he had been disappearing all this time. The younger one told him that he had something to do. The older one didn't understand how he could still smile in such a situation. The elder decided to ignore it, relying on his character, and only said that time was short and Liarte needed to be returned. Thandarian said that he would return her. Ain wondered how his brother was going to pull this off. The guy smiled and didn't give a clear answer, but just turned to Lian. He said that if the younger one didn't mind, he would show him something important. The young man smiled sinisterly and replied that he was ready to do anything to get his sister back. Meanwhile, Liarte was slowly finishing her painting. Marilyn was standing nearby and noticed that the fox had become very attached to the lady. The maid looked at the picture and said that it was very beautiful. The girl asked if the maid had guessed what it was. She confirmed and said that the lady had written a wonderful sea. Liarte smiled and said that it was indeed the sea that she had seen for the first time, and said that after she left Elheim, Mikael had taken her there first. Marilyn asked the lady if she wanted to frame the painting. The girl thought about it and then replied that she wanted to give the painting as a gift. The girl found Mikael while he was talking to Valto in the garden. The boy immediately turned his head at her voice. The knight greeted the lady politely, and the young man asked why she was looking for him. Lily said she had something to tell him. The girl blushed a little at his clarification, but overcame herself and handed him the painting and said that she wanted to give it to him as a gift. She said that she had painted the sea, which she had first seen with him. The guy was amazed and even asked if he could really accept this painting. The lady confirmed. Mikael smiled happily and assured him that it was the best gift he had ever been given and assured him that he would cherish it. Valto also praised the lady's talent. Birch was even upset that they couldn't show it to the world, but suddenly he thought about the competition. The girl was surprised. The guy explained that there was a competition in which aristocrats participated anonymously. There, everyone could demonstrate their skills. The girl thought for a moment and remembered that she must have heard about this contest before her reincarnation. The Empire had one archduke and 3 dukes. Archduke Eilis was closest to Empress Terentia. Following him were Duke Elheim, awakened by water, Duke Carmen, awakened by death, and Duke Karen, who hid his face behind a mask. She had heard that the latter was the biggest connoisseur of this competition under the pseudonym Jen Walker. Liarte thought that by participating in the competition she would be able to meet the Duke, and thus help Bircha even more. To this she replied that she would be happy to participate. Mikael smiled and said that he would tell his father about it. The boy thanked her again for the gift and asked if she wanted anything in return. She replied that she hadn't thought about it. Then the boy said that he would choose something himself, but that it was a secret. Although she didn't understand what he meant, she promised to wait impatiently. Suddenly, the girl became alert. It seemed that Mikael also felt something, and they both looked up at the sky. Valto didn't feel anything, but he asked what happened. The girl was silent for a moment. Then she replied that it seemed to her that the sky had turned black. The young man replied that he also felt something, as if some strong aura had momentarily torn the sky apart. This made the girl feel like a cold breeze was blowing over her body. She said that she had a bad feeling. The guy quickly hugged her, assuring her that nothing bad had happened and everything was fine. But still, he couldn't take his suspicious gaze away from the sky. He didn't tell her anything, but he thought that today, according to the plan, their spies were to start setting fire to the prince's palace, and he decided that the darkening of the sky had something to do with it. Despite her worries, there was peace and quiet for several days. All the while she practiced her art after agreeing to participate in the competition. She also gradually began to get used to spending time with the Bircha family, and it was strange when everyone asked her if she wanted anything. During all these days, she smiled often and realized that she had never even dreamed of such a thing in Elheim. Remembering her family, she suddenly realized that she no longer felt angry when she thought of them, but now she didn't even care what happened to them. Suddenly, Marilyn distracted the girl from her work and asked if the lady would like to take a walk in the garden with her. Liarte could not refuse, and while walking, noticed that the weather was wonderful. The maid agreed and said that on a special day for some people, even the sky shone brightly. Hearing about the special day, the lady was surprised. Finally, Marilyn led the lady to a certain spot and pointed it out. Lily stopped for a moment and tried to look in, when suddenly she saw all the birches standing there holding flowers. They all smiled and invited the lady to join them quickly. Mikael came out first and, handing out flowers, wished the girl a happy birthday.